Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Daniel Garrett, 34. This happened in October 2024. I used to love the wilderness. The Sierra Nevada mountains were my sanctuary, a place where the incessant noise of San Francisco's tech industry couldn't follow me. That was before Desolation Valley took everything from me, before I learned that some places in this world don't welcome human intrusion, before I discovered that sometimes the legends local people whisper about have teeth. Our group had been planning this trip for months, a week-long expedition through the most remote sections of Desolation Wilderness near Lake Tahoe. We were 6 friends who'd met at Lumina Technologies, where we all worked as software engineers. This trip was meant to be a celebration. Our startup had just been acquired for an 8-figure sum, and we wanted to decompress before our lives changed forever. There was me, my best friend since college, Marcus Wellington, 35, an outdoorsman with an infectious laugh who could start a fire in a rainstorm. Eliza Chen, 32, our brilliant lead developer with a quiet determination and encyclopedic knowledge of wilderness survival. Her girlfriend, Sofia Rodriguez, 33, a photographer with a keen eye for beauty in strange places. Trevor Brooks, 29, our newest team member with more enthusiasm than experience. And Cassandra Cass Mitchell, 34, our group's natural leader who'd planned most of the expedition details. We should have paid more attention to the ranger's warnings when we registered our hike. Desolation Valley's been having some strange occurrences lately, Ranger Simmons had said, his weathered face unusually grave. 3 separate hiking groups reported disorientation, equipment failures, and other things. He'd hesitated before continuing. Just stick to the main trails and don't venture past the Phantom Lake marker. We'd laughed it off. We were experienced hikers with top-of-the-line gear. What could possibly go wrong? Day 1 was perfect: crisp autumn air, golden aspen leaves, and spectacular views of crystal blue alpine lakes. We covered 12 miles before setting up our first camp near a small stream. Around the campfire that night, Trevor mentioned he'd read about an old hunting lodge deep in the valley that wasn't on any official maps. Supposedly built in the 1920s by a mining magnate named Solomon Blackwood, he explained, scrolling through his phone. Local legend says Blackwood disappeared there in 1927 with his entire household staff. The place was abandoned, and hikers sometimes report seeing lights inside even though it's miles from any road or power line. Sounds like our kind of adventure, Cass said, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. We could make a detour tomorrow to check it out. I remember feeling a flicker of unease. What about the ranger's warning? Marcus clapped my shoulder. Since when did you become the cautious one, Dan? We're celebrating, remember? Besides, we've got satellite phones if anything goes wrong. If only we'd known how useless those phones would become. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Our first sign that something was off should have been when all our watches showed different times. Mine said 7:15 a.m., Eliza's read 6:30, and Marcus's had stopped completely at 3:33 a.m. Weird atmospheric interference, Eliza suggested, resetting her watch. Happens sometimes in mountain valleys. By midday, we'd veered off the main trail, following Trevor's coordinates toward the supposed location of Blackwood Lodge. The forest grew denser, older, with massive pines that seemed to watch us pass. The silence was oppressive. No birdsong, no insect buzzing. Just the sound of our boots on pine needles and our increasingly labored breathing. Does anyone else feel like we've been walking for way longer than we should have? Sophia asked after several hours. She was right. According to our GPS, we'd covered only 2 miles since lunch, but the sun was already beginning to set. Impossible. GPS glitching, Marcus said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Satellite signal's probably weak in this valley. Then Trevor, who'd been checking his phone, froze. Guys, my phone says it's October 27th. So what? Cass asked. We started hiking on the 22nd. That's 5 days. We've only been out here for 2. A nervous laugh rippled through the group. Eliza checked her own phone. Mine says the 22nd still. Your phone's just glitching. But one by one, we checked our devices. 3 showed the 22nd. 2 showed the 27th. And Sophia's displayed December 1st, along with a stream of text messages that hadn't been there before. Messages from her parents asking where she was, why she hadn't come home, if she was safe. Messages dated weeks in the future. This isn't funny, she whispered, her face pale. I want to go back. Looking back, that was our last chance to retreat, to return to civilization. Instead, Cass pointed through a break in the trees. There it is. Blackwood Lodge loomed in a small clearing ahead, a massive log structure with a steep pitched roof and stone chimney. It looked wrong somehow. Too perfect, too preserved for a century-old abandoned building. No broken windows, no sagging porch, no encroaching vegetation, just immaculate dark wood and gleaming glass, as if it had been built yesterday. This can't be it, I said. It's too well maintained. Maybe someone restored it? Trevor suggested, already moving toward the building. Wait, I called, but he was already halfway to the porch, the others following behind. I had no choice but to join them, fighting the growing dread in my stomach. The front door was unlocked. It swung open silently, revealing a grand entrance hall with a massive stone fireplace and mounted animal heads. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, yet somehow seemed preserved, frozen in time. A grandfather clock against one wall showed 3:33, its pendulum motionless. Hello, Trevor called out. His voice echoed through the empty rooms, returning to us slightly distorted, as if someone had whispered his greeting back. We shouldn't be here, I said. This is trespassing. On what? A ghost lodge that doesn't exist on any map? Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. Besides, it's getting dark. We can camp here tonight and continue tomorrow. That night, we settled into the lodge's great room. Despite my unease, I had to admit it was more comfortable than our tents would have been. We built a fire in the massive fireplace and spread our sleeping bags across antique rugs that probably cost more than our yearly salaries. I found this, Sophia said, holding up an old leather-bound book she'd discovered on a shelf. It looks like Blackwood's journal. We gathered around as she began to read, her voice growing more disturbed with each page. Solomon Blackwood had apparently been obsessed with something he called the thinning, periods when the barrier between our world and the other side weakened. He'd built the lodge specifically in Desolation Valley because, according to his research, it was a focal point for this phenomenon. The journal entries became increasingly erratic, describing shadows that moved independently, voices from empty rooms, and visitors from the forest who were not quite human but wearing human skin like ill-fitting suits. The final entry, dated October 31st, 1927, simply read, "They're coming through. God help us all." Creepy bedtime story, Trevor said with a nervous laugh after Sophia finished. Guy was obviously losing his mind out here alone. He wasn't alone, though, Eliza pointed out. He had staff. What happened to them? No one had an answer. Sleep came fitfully. I dozed off sometime after midnight, only to jerk awake at what my watch said was 3:33 a.m. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in deep shadows. Something had woken me. A sound. I lay still, listening. There. A soft scratching at the windows, like fingernails on glass. I sat up slowly, squinting into the darkness. Everyone else appeared to be asleep. The scratching continued, moving from one window to another, circling the room. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on. Nothing happened. I tried again. Dead. The scratching stopped. In its place came a soft tapping at the front door. Tap, tap, tap. Then a voice, barely audible. "Let me in, Daniel. I'm so cold out here." It was my voice, my exact voice. I scrambled to wake Marcus, shaking him roughly. "Someone's outside," I hissed. He groaned, half asleep. "What time is it?" I glanced at my watch. Still 3:33 a.m. I looked at the grandfather clock across the room. Its hands pointed to 3:33 as well, but now its pendulum was swinging, the ticking abnormally loud in the quiet room. The tapping came again, more insistent. "Let me in, friends. It's Daniel. I'm hurt." Marcus was fully awake now, his face pale in the dim light. "That sounds exactly like you," he whispered. One by one, the others woke. We huddled together as the thing with my voice continued its pleas, growing increasingly desperate, then angry. "Let me in. I know you can hear me." Something slammed against the door with enough force to make the hinges creak. Then silence fell again, heavy and oppressive. "What the hell was that?" Trevor's voice shook. "We need to leave," I said. "First light, we pack up and get out of here." Everyone nodded in agreement. No one slept for the remainder of the night. Dawn arrived with an unnatural slowness, the sky brightening to a sickly yellow rather than the clear blue of the previous days. We packed quickly, avoiding discussion of the night's events as if speaking about it might summon whatever had been outside. As we shouldered our backpacks, Cass pulled out her satellite phone. "I'm calling for emergency extraction. This isn't worth it." She frowned at the screen. No signal. One by one, we checked our phones and satellite devices. All dead or showing no service. Even our GPS units displayed only static. "It's fine," Marcus said, forcing confidence into his voice. "We just need to get back to the main trail. We can't be more than a day's hike from where we started." We left Blackwood Lodge under that strange yellow sky. I felt the building watching us go, as if it were somehow alive and aware. None of us looked back. The forest had changed overnight. The trail we'd followed to the lodge was gone, replaced by dense undergrowth that seemed to grab at our ankles. Trees I didn't recognize twisted up from the forest floor in impossible shapes. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous in our lungs. "This isn't right," Eliza kept saying, consulting her compass. "We should be heading north, but the compass keeps spinning." By midday, it was clear we were lost. The sun, barely visible through the canopy, seemed to move too quickly across the sky. Shadows stretched in directions that defied logic. We trudged on, the silence between us growing as panic began to set in. That's when we heard the singing. A woman's voice, sweet and clear, somewhere ahead of us. "Hello," Cass called out. "We need help. We're lost." The singing stopped. Then, "Come this way, travelers. I can offer shelter." We followed the voice to a small clearing where a cabin stood. Not the grand lodge we'd left behind, but a simple one-room structure with smoke curling from its chimney. An old woman stood in the doorway, her face deeply lined, her silver hair wild around her shoulders. "You poor dears," she said, her smile revealing too many teeth. "Lost in the valley, are you? I'm Eleanor. Come in, come in." Inside, the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, impossibly so. A long table set for 6 dominated the space, laden with steaming food. The smell made my stomach growl despite my apprehension. "I so rarely get visitors," Eleanor said, gesturing for us to sit. "Please, eat. You must be famished." We hesitated, but hunger won out. The food was delicious. Roast meat with herbs, fresh bread, and wine that warmed me from within. Only after we'd eaten did I think to ask what meat we'd consumed. Eleanor's smile widened at the question. "The last group who came through," she said simply. "They were lost too." A beat of horrified silence, then nervous laughter from Trevor. "Good one. Seriously though, can you help us find our way back to the main trail?" Eleanor's expression didn't change. "Why would I do that? You're already where you belong." I noticed then that the windows of the cabin no longer showed the forest outside, but instead reflected our own faces, except wrong somehow. In the glass, my reflection's eyes were black pits, its mouth stretched in an inhuman grin. "We need to go," I said, standing abruptly. "Now." Eleanor's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "No one leaves the valley once they've eaten at my table. Those are the rules, Daniel Garrett." I hadn't told her my name. What followed was chaos. Sophia screamed as her reflection stepped out of the window glass, a twisted mirror version of herself with elongated limbs and too many joints. Trevor bolted for the door but found it gone, replaced by solid wall. Eliza grabbed a knife from the table, brandishing it at Eleanor, whose form seemed to flicker between the old woman and something much taller, much thinner. "You belong to the valley now," Eleanor, or whatever she was, said. "To us, the Blackwood brood." Marcus managed to shatter one of the windows with a chair. Instead of breaking, the glass melted away like mercury, revealing not the forest, but a vast darkness speckled with points of light that were definitely not stars. "Run!" he shouted, and without thinking, I leapt through the opening, the others close behind. We fell, tumbling through nothingness for what felt like minutes before crashing back onto solid ground. The forest floor, but in deep night now. Above us, the cabin was gone. 6 flashlights lay in a perfect circle around us, all pointing inward, all shining brightly despite having been dead hours before. "What's happening to us?" Sophia sobbed, clinging to Eliza. Trevor was counting and recounting our group. "We're all here, right? Everyone made it?" We had, physically at least. But as we gathered our wits and began to move through the midnight forest, I noticed subtle changes in my friends. Marcus kept touching his face as if confirming it was still his own. Cass's normally confident stride had developed an odd hitch, like she was relearning how to walk. And Trevor's eyes caught the flashlight beams differently, reflecting them back like an animal's. We walked for hours through the darkness. The forest around us was alive with whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. Occasionally, we'd glimpse movement at the edge of our light, tall, thin shapes that retreated when directly observed. By dawn, a dawn that came too quickly, the night lasting barely 4 hours by our watches, all of which now read 3:33 regardless of when we checked them, we stumbled upon a trail marker. The relief was palpable. "We're back on the main path," Eliza said, her voice hoarse. "If we follow this, we should reach the ranger station by nightfall." But the trail led us in circles. We'd pass the same distinctive tree or rock formation multiple times, despite maintaining a consistent direction. The sun arced overhead too rapidly, and soon darkness was falling again. That night, huddled around a meager fire that burned with an unnatural blue tinge, Trevor began to change. It started with scratching at his arms, complaining that his skin felt too tight. Then trembling. Then silence, his eyes growing distant and unfocused. "Trev?" Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay, man?" Trevor turned to look at him with a smile that stretched too wide. "Never better," he said, but his voice had changed, developing a hollow echo. "I can hear them now. The Blackwood brood. They've been waiting so long for new vessels." He lunged suddenly, fingers hooked into claws, going for Marcus's eyes. We managed to restrain him, using climbing rope to bind his hands and feet as he thrashed and spit, his face contorting in ways human musculature shouldn't allow. "You can't leave," he kept saying, his voice fluctuating between his own and something ancient and dry. "The valley doesn't give back what it takes." None of us slept that night. By morning, Trevor had fallen into an unnatural stillness, eyes open but unseeing, breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. We couldn't leave him, but we couldn't stay either. "One of us needs to get help," Cass decided. "The rest will stay with Trevor." "I'll go," I volunteered. "I'm still feeling myself." Unlike some of the others who had begun showing subtle signs of whatever had taken Trevor, Sophia had developed a tic, her head occasionally jerking to look over her shoulder at nothing. Eliza kept forgetting common words. and Cass's movements had become increasingly jerky and uncoordinated. Only Marcus seemed relatively unaffected, so he agreed to come with me. We took one of the satellite phones, still dead, a compass, still useless, and enough supplies for 3 days. Head directly east, Eliza instructed, sketching a crude map. Eventually, you'll hit the highway, even if the trails don't cooperate. Marcus hugged each of the others. We'll bring back help, he promised. Just hold on. As we departed, I glanced back to see Trevor sitting up, his bound hands in his lap, watching us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The forest grew stranger the farther we walked. Trees bent away from our path as if reluctant to touch us. The ground became spongy and uneven. At times I could swear we were walking vertically up a sheer face, yet somehow maintaining our footing. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Marcus asked after hours of silent hiking. "I don't know," I admitted. "Trevor seems gone, and the others are changing too." "We all are," he said quietly. "Haven't you noticed your reflection?" I hadn't dared look. Now, pulling out my phone's black screen, I saw what he meant. My reflection showed my face, but something else lurked behind my features, like a second face trying to emerge from beneath my skin. We made camp that night in a small hollow. The fire refused to stay lit, no matter how carefully we built it. In the darkness, we heard movement all around us. Rustling, breathing, occasional snippets of conversation in voices that sounded disturbingly like our own. "Whatever's happening," Marcus whispered, "I think it's been happening since we entered the valley. Time doesn't work right here. Reality doesn't work right. And I think we might already be dead." "Don't say that," I hissed. "Think about it, Dan. The ranger's warnings. The lodge that shouldn't exist. Eleanor talking about the last group. What if we're just repeating what's already happened to others? What if we died at that lodge days ago?" Before I could respond, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Then another. "Park rangers?" "Hello," I called out. "We need help." The beams swung toward us. Relief flooded through me as figures emerged from the trees until I saw their faces. It was us. 6 identical copies of our hiking group, but wrong in subtle ways. Their skin hung loosely, as if it didn't quite fit. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized. "We've been looking for you," my doppelganger said, its mouth moving out of sync with the words. "It's time to complete the transition." Marcus and I ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces. Behind us, our doubles pursued with unnatural speed, their flashlight beams dancing through the trees. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. Then Marcus stumbled. I turned back to help him up and saw his face changing in the dim moonlight, the bones shifting beneath his skin, his eyes darkening to empty sockets. "Run, Dan," he gasped, his voice already taking on that hollow quality Trevor's had. "Don't let them take you." I hesitated for only a second before survival instinct took over. I ran, leaving my best friend behind, his screams chasing me through the forest until they changed, mid-cry to something like laughter. I ran until dawn, then collapsed beside a small stream. My reflection in the water showed a face that was less and less my own with each passing hour. I had to find help, not just for my friends, but for myself. By some miracle, my phone chirped, a single bar of service flickering in and out. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, struggling to remember my own name when the operator answered. "Desolation Valley," I managed to say. "Hikers, missing, Blackwood Lodge." "Sir, there is no Blackwood Lodge in Desolation Wilderness," the operator said. "Can you be more specific about your location?" That's when I saw them emerging from the trees around me. My friends, or what had once been my friends. Trevor led them, his body moving with fluid grace that was not his own. Behind him came Eliza and Sophia, their arms linked, heads tilted at identical angles. Then Cass, her formerly confident stride now a predatory stalk, and Marcus, my best friend, his face a half-formed thing caught between human and something else, his eyes obsidian pools. "We found you," Trevor said, but the voice wasn't his. It was ancient, dry, like rustling pages. "The transition is nearly complete." I backed away, phone still clutched in my hand. The operator's voice seemed very far away now. "What did you do to my friends?" I demanded. "We made them better," said the thing wearing Eliza's skin. "We completed them, as we will complete you." "The Blackwood brood needs new vessels," Cass explained, her jaw moving incorrectly. "Our old forms were deteriorating. Yours are strong, young, perfect." They advanced as one. I turned to flee but found Eleanor standing behind me, no longer bothering with her human disguise. She towered above me, impossibly thin, her limbs too long, her face a mockery of human features. "No one leaves the valley," she said. "Not really." I fought. I like to think I fought harder than anyone has ever fought in that valley. I broke Trevor's arm, the bone snapping with a sound like a rotten branch. I pushed Sophia into the stream, her body sizzling on contact with the running water. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst. In the end, it didn't matter. They caught me as night fell, forming a circle around me in a small clearing. I had nowhere left to run. "Why fight?" Marcus asked, his voice now a blend of his own and something deeper, older. "The transition is painful only if you resist." "What are you?" I gasped, my strength finally giving out as I collapsed to my knees. "We are the original inhabitants," Eleanor said, stepping into the circle. "This valley was ours long before humans came. We cannot leave it, bound as we are to this place. But we can wear your forms, experience life through your memories." "Solomon Blackwood discovered us," said the thing that had been Trevor. "He thought to use us, to harness what he called the thinning. Instead, we used him, and his staff, and all who came after." "You can't keep doing this," I said. "People will come looking. They always do," Eleanor agreed. "And they always join us, as you will now." They closed in, their hands, no longer entirely human, reaching for me. I felt the first touch like ice against my skin, then burning, then a sensation of being unmade from the inside out. I woke up 3 weeks later on the side of the Highway 50, 15 miles from where we'd started our hike. A trucker found me, delirious and babbling about doppelgangers and time distortions. I had no memory of how I'd escaped or made it to the highway. The search for my friends lasted months. They found Sophia's camera with the last photos taken at Blackwood Lodge, a building that, according to all official records and maps, doesn't exist. They found scraps of Trevor's backpack, Eliza's compass, Cass's satellite phone. They never found bodies. I tried to lead rescue teams back to the lodge, to Eleanor's cabin. We never found either. The forest in Desolation Valley revealed nothing but trees and rocks and the occasional startled deer. Eventually, the search was called off. 5 hikers lost in the wilderness, presumed dead. A tragedy, but not unheard of. The case remains open, but inactive. I've never gone back to the mountains. I can't, because sometimes, in reflective surfaces, windows, mirrors, still water, I see them watching me. My friends, but not my friends. Waiting, smiling those too wide smiles. And sometimes in those reflections my own face starts to change, revealing something ancient underneath that's still trying to break through. No one leaves Desolation Valley. Not really. It just lets you think you have, for a while. The others are still there, wearing my friends' faces, walking with their gaits, speaking with their voices, waiting for more visitors to wander off the main trails, to be curious about legends they should leave alone. If you're planning a hike through the Sierra Nevada, specifically through Desolation Wilderness, stay on the marked paths. Don't venture past Phantom Lake. Don't follow voices in the forest, especially if they sound familiar. And if you happen to meet a group of 6 hikers who introduce themselves as Marcus, Eliza, Sophia, Trevor, Cass, and Daniel, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because the thing using my name isn't me. Not anymore. I'm still here, still fighting what's trying to emerge from inside me. Still human, mostly. For now. My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm 32 years old. This happened in October 2024, and I'm still not sure if I should be writing it down. Maybe putting the experience into words gives it power. Maybe it makes it real in a way I've been trying to deny. But the nightmares won't stop, and my therapist thinks this might help. I doubt it. 10 months ago, I walked away from a 6-figure salary as a software developer at a major tech company in San Francisco. Burnout doesn't begin to describe what I was experiencing. Panic attacks in bathroom stalls, insomnia that medication couldn't touch, a constant gnawing emptiness that made me feel like a ghost haunting my own life. So I quit, cashed out some stock options, paid off my debts, and decided to spend a year reconnecting with myself through nature. I'd always been drawn to the wilderness, even as a kid. There's something about the silence, the honest brutality of it. Nature doesn't lie to you or set unrealistic expectations. It just is. Dangerous and beautiful and indifferent. I'd done weekend hikes before, but never anything extensive. The Trinity Alps Wilderness in Northern California seemed like the perfect challenge for my first multi-day solo trek. Remote enough to truly disconnect, but with established trails I could follow as a relative novice. I spent weeks researching the area, buying equipment, planning my route. I'd start at the Stewart Fork trailhead, make my way to Emerald and Sapphire Lakes, then loop around to Caribou Lake before heading back. 5 days, 4 nights. Challenging for someone with my limited experience, but not impossible. I'd chosen late October deliberately. Fewer hikers, no mosquitoes, beautiful fall colors. I knew it would be cold, especially at night, but I'd prepared for that. Or so I thought. The morning I set out, the trailhead parking lot was empty except for a single dusty pickup truck. The air was crisp, hovering just above freezing, my breath forming small clouds that dissipated quickly in the pale morning light. My backpack was heavier than I'd anticipated, almost 45 pounds with 4 days' worth of food, water, and gear, but the weight felt good on my shoulders. Grounding. Real. The first few miles were exactly what I needed. The trail wound through old-growth forests of pine and fir, alongside Stewart Fork Creek with its clear, ice-cold water tumbling over granite boulders. I saw nobody, heard nothing but birds, wind, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. By mid-afternoon, I'd covered almost 8 miles and was beginning to feel the strain in my legs and shoulders. According to my map, there was a small camping area near a creek junction ahead. Perfect timing. That's when I met Marcus. He was already setting up camp when I arrived, a lean, weathered guy maybe a few years older than me, with a short reddish beard and sunglasses perched on a baseball cap. His gear looked expensive, but well used. "Hey there," he called out, raising a hand in greeting. "Plenty of room if you want to share the spot." I was mildly disappointed to encounter another person so soon, but he seemed friendly enough and I was too tired to push on. "Thanks," I said, dropping my pack with a grateful sigh. "I'm Ethan." "Marcus." He didn't offer a last name. "Solo trip." I nodded, stretching my sore shoulders. "First long one. You?" "I'm always solo." He smiled, but something about it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Been coming to these mountains for years. They feel like home now." We chatted while setting up our respective camps. Marcus was knowledgeable about the area, pointing out landmarks on my map that weren't properly marked, suggesting viewpoints worth a detour. He'd brought vacuum-sealed steaks for dinner and generously offered me one, which I accepted despite having my own dehydrated meal ready. The meat was oddly gamey but delicious after a day of trail mix and energy bars. As darkness fell, we sat by his small fire. Against regulations, technically, but safe enough if you're careful, he'd said, and he told stories about the Trinity Alps, old mining claims, lost hikers, weather that changed in minutes. The indigenous people here believed these mountains were sacred, Marcus said, poking at the fire with a stick. Embers spiraled upward into the star-filled sky. The Wintu called this area the Range of the Spirits. They said there were things that lived here. Not animals, not people. Something else. Like what? I asked, feeling a slight chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Marcus stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. Skin takers, they called them. Beings that could wear your appearance, your memories. The ultimate predators. He suddenly grinned and tossed the stick into the flames. But that's just old stories. Ghost tales for around the campfire. I laughed, but it sounded forced even to my own ears. We turned in shortly after, each to our own tent. Despite my exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. The wind picked up around midnight, making the trees creak and groan. Once I could have sworn I heard whispers just outside my tent. Not words exactly, but a rhythmic susurration like someone practicing unfamiliar syllables. I told myself it was just the wind through pine needles. I woke at dawn to find Marcus gone. His tent, his gear, everything vanished. The only evidence he'd been there at all was the small fire pit, now cold with gray ash. I might have thought I'd dreamed him if not for the lingering taste of that steak in my mouth. He must have packed up before sunrise, though I couldn't imagine why. The courtesy would have been to say goodbye, at least. I made coffee on my small camp stove, studying my map and GPS as I drank. Day 2 would take me deeper into the wilderness, to Emerald Lake at the base of what locals called the Caribou Mountain Massif. According to my research, the lake was an otherworldly blue-green from mineral deposits, surrounded by stark granite peaks. It would be an 11-mile day with significant elevation gain, so I packed up quickly and hit the trail. The day was clear but cold, frost still clinging to shadowed areas even as the sun climbed higher. My breath fogged in front of me as I hiked, and I soon settled into a rhythm. Left foot, right foot, watch for roots and rocks, check the map occasionally, drink water, eat trail mix, repeat. About 3 hours in, something began to feel off. The trail didn't quite match my map anymore. A stream crossing I'd anticipated never materialized. A prominent rock formation shown on the topographic map was nowhere to be seen. I checked my GPS, but the reading seemed wrong, placing me almost half a mile from where I thought I was. I blamed satellite reception in the deep valleys and relied instead on my compass and map. By midday, I had to admit I was confused. According to every calculation, I should have been approaching a junction with the Emerald Lake Trail, but I was in a dense forest with no junction in sight. I backtracked twice, thinking I'd missed a turn, but found nothing. My unease grew when I pulled out my phone to check a digital version of the map, only to find the battery completely drained despite having charged it fully the night before. The sky darkened earlier than expected, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. The temperature dropped rapidly. I needed to make camp, but I was nowhere near where I'd planned to be. On my third pass looking for the missed junction, I finally found a small clearing suitable for a tent. As I unpacked, a disturbing discovery. My carefully sealed food bags had somehow spoiled. The vacuum-sealed pasta had black mold growing inside the packaging. The sealed jerky was slimy and putrid. Even the freeze-dried meals smelled wrong when I cautiously opened one. Only my energy bars and trail mix seemed unaffected. I sat on a fallen log, stomach churning with hunger and anxiety. How was this possible? The food had been fine that morning. A noise from the trees made me look up sharply. 20 yards away stood a deer. No, not a deer. It was similar in shape, but wrong somehow. Its proportions slightly off, its movements too deliberate. It stared at me with eyes that reflected no light, then turned and walked away with an almost human gait. I should have been more concerned, but exhaustion and hunger dulled my reactions. I set up my tent with numb fingers as the first snowflakes began to fall. Snow! In late October, it was possible at this elevation, but the forecast had predicted clear skies for the entire week. I crawled into my sleeping bag wearing every layer I possessed, shivering, and choked down 2 energy bars before falling into a restless sleep. The whispers came again that night, closer this time. Sibilant, insistent sounds just outside the thin nylon of my tent. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, heart pounding so loudly I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. A shadow moved across the tent wall. Too tall, too straight to be an animal. I held my breath until my lungs burned, until the shadow moved away and the whispers faded. Morning brought 6 inches of snow and absolute silence. The forest was transformed, beautiful in its white shroud, but treacherous for hiking. I decided to abandon my original route and head directly back to the trailhead. 4 more days in these conditions, lost and with spoiled food, was a recipe for disaster. I packed quickly, my fingers clumsy with cold, and consulted my compass. South-southwest should take me back toward the main trail. I'd been hiking for perhaps an hour when I spotted a figure ahead on the trail, a welcome sight after the isolation and growing unease. "Hello!" I called out, quickening my pace. The figure turned, and I recognized the red beard and baseball cap immediately. "Marcus," I said as I got closer. "Ethan!" His face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Didn't expect to see anyone else out in this weather." "You left without saying goodbye yesterday," I said, unable to keep a note of accusation from my voice. He tilted his head, looking confused. "Yesterday? No, we haven't met before." He extended his hand. "I'm Marcus, riding out this unexpected snow before heading back to the trailhead." I stared at his outstretched hand, a cold weight settling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. "We shared a campsite," I said slowly. "You gave me a steak." Marcus looked at me with concern now, his hand dropping to his side. "Must have been someone else, friend. I've been alone out here for 3 days. Haven't seen another soul until now." I wanted to argue, to insist, but doubt crept in. He looked like Marcus, same build, same red beard, same expensive gear, but something was subtly different. His eyes, perhaps, or the way he held himself. And who was I to question his reality? I was the one who'd gotten lost, whose food had inexplicably spoiled, who was hearing whispers in the night. "Sorry," I mumbled. "You look like someone I met. Guess I'm more tired than I thought." "Happens to the best of us," he said easily. "You heading back to the trailhead? We could hike together." I nodded, relieved at the prospect of company despite my confusion. As we hiked, Marcus chatted about the area, much as he, or his doppelganger, had done before. Same knowledge of the terrain, same casual confidence. Yet there were discrepancies in his stories, places he claimed to have visited yesterday that would have been impossible given the distances involved. By mid-afternoon, the snow had stopped, but low clouds obscured the surrounding peaks, making navigation challenging. Marcus seemed unconcerned, moving surely through the white landscape, occasionally pointing out landmarks I couldn't distinguish. "There's a cabin about 2 miles ahead," he said as the light began to fade. "Old Forest Service emergency shelter. Not on most maps, but it's there. We can spend the night, get an early start tomorrow." I was cold, tired, and increasingly unsettled by my companion, but the prospect of a solid roof overhead was too tempting to resist. We pushed on as darkness fell, moving by headlamp through the silent forest. The cabin appeared suddenly, a small dark shape against the snow. It was indeed basic. 1 room, an old wood stove, a couple of crude bunks with bare mattresses. But it was shelter. Marcus knew exactly where to find dry wood stacked against the back wall, and soon had a fire going in the ancient stove. "You seem to know this place well," I said, watching him move confidently around the dim space. "Told you, I've been coming here for years," he said without looking up from the fire. "No, you didn't. Not today." The words left my mouth before I could consider them. Marcus straightened slowly and turned to face me. In the flickering firelight, his features seemed to shift subtly, like a reflection in moving water. "What exactly are you saying, Ethan?" His voice was still pleasant, but there was an undercurrent to it now, something cold and ancient. I stepped backward until I hit the closed door of the cabin. "Who are you? Really?" He smiled, and I swear his teeth looked different, sharper, more numerous than a human mouth should hold. "I'm Marcus," he said simply. "I'm the friendly hiker you met your first night out. I'm the deer you saw watching you. I'm the whisper outside your tent." With each sentence, his voice changed slightly, becoming higher, then lower, then somehow both at once. I fumbled behind me for the door handle, found it, and yanked. Nothing happened. It seemed to have fused shut. "What do you want?" My voice was a hoarse whisper now. Marcus, or whatever he was, took a step toward me. Company, connection, consumption. He cocked his head like a curious bird. "Do you know how lonely it gets, Ethan? Centuries in these mountains. The Wintu knew to leave offerings, to stay away from certain places. But your kind, the new people, you blunder in with your maps and GPS, thinking you understand this place. Another step closer. You don't. You can't." I pressed myself against the door, mind racing. The journal Marcus had mentioned the first night, skin takers. He'd called them skinwalkers. Creatures of indigenous lore that could take human form. "You're not real," I managed. "You can't be." "More real than you," he said, now close enough that I could feel unnatural heat radiating from his body. "I was here when the mountains rose. I'll be here when they crumble." His hand reached toward my face, and I noticed with horror that his fingers were too long, the joints bending in impossible directions. Pure instinct took over. I reached into my pocket where I kept a small container of salt for cooking and flung it directly into his face. There was a sound like bacon hitting a hot pan, and Marcus, the thing wearing Marcus's shape, recoiled with a shriek that no human throat could produce. Its face bubbled where the salt had hit, the skin sloughing away to reveal something dark and glistening beneath. I didn't wait to see more. The door suddenly gave way behind me, and I tumbled backward into the snow. I scrambled to my feet and ran, leaving my backpack and most of my gear behind. The moonlight reflecting off the snow provided just enough light to avoid trees, but I had no idea which direction I was running. Only away from the cabin, away from the thing inside it. The inhuman screaming continued behind me, then abruptly cut off. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing behind a fallen tree, trying to muffle my gasping breaths with a gloved hand. Minutes passed. Nothing. Had I lost it? Or was it toying with me? A predator enjoying the chase. "Ethan?" A woman's voice, tentative and frightened, came from somewhere to my right. "Is someone there? I need help." I stayed completely still. There was no way another hiker would be out here in these conditions at night. "Please," the voice called again, closer now. "I'm hurt. I can see your tracks in the snow." Shit, I hadn't thought about tracks. I peered around the fallen tree and saw a figure about 30 yards away, a woman in a blue jacket, moving with a pronounced limp. "I got separated from my group," she called out. "I twisted my ankle. Please, I know someone's there." I remained silent, watching as she moved closer, following my footprints in the snow. When she was about 20 feet away, a shaft of moonlight illuminated her face. Pretty, mid-30s, dark hair escaping from a knit cap. Normal, human, but so had Marcus looked. "I have a cabin," she said, desperation in her voice. "Just over that ridge. I have food, medical supplies. Please help me get there." A cabin, just like Marcus had led me to. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat and suppressed it. The woman stopped, cocking her head in a gesture horribly familiar. "Ethan," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Don't you want to know how I know your name?" I broke a cover and ran again, no longer caring about noise or tracks. Behind me, the woman's voice distorted into something multi-toned and guttural, calling out words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood on a primal level. Threats, promises of pain, hunger, ancient as the mountains themselves. I ran blindly through the forest until I broke suddenly into a clearing and found myself at the edge of a lake, its surface frozen and gleaming in the moonlight. I'd looped back around somehow. This had to be Caribou Lake, part of my original route, which meant there should be a marked trail nearby leading back toward the trailhead. A sound behind me, branches snapping, a heavy body moving fast through underbrush. I stepped onto the frozen lake without thinking, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was coming. The ice creaked ominously beneath my boots but held. Halfway across the lake, I heard the ice crack, not under me, but behind me. I turned to see a figure walking slowly toward me across the frozen surface. Not Marcus now, not the woman, but something that tried to be both at once and failed horribly. Its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow. Its face shifted constantly between male and female features, never settling, like clay being relentlessly reshaped by invisible hands. "Ethan," it called in that double voice. "You can't escape. There's nowhere to go that I won't find you." Another crack in the ice, louder this time, spreading from beneath the creature's feet like lightning bolts. It looked down, momentarily confused. In that instant of distraction, I spotted a dark shape through the translucent ice. Not a fish or debris, but what looked like a backpack. Someone else had fallen through here, recently enough that their gear hadn't yet sunk to the bottom. A desperate idea formed. I dropped to my knees and began clearing snow from the ice with my gloved hands, searching. The creature had noticed my actions and was approaching again, more cautiously now, testing each step on the weakened ice. My hand struck something hard beneath the snow, an ice axe, the kind technical climbers use, its owner clearly one of the unlucky ones who had fallen through. I seized it and stood, backing away as the creature drew closer. When it was 10 feet away, I raised the axe high and brought it down with all my strength onto the ice between us. The axe head penetrated several inches. I wrenched it free and struck again in the same spot. A web of cracks spread outward with a sound like gunshots. The creature stopped, understanding dawning on its ever-shifting features. "You'll die too," it said, the double voice now tinged with something that might have been respect. "Maybe," I panted, raising the axe again. "But I'm just passing through. You'd be trapped down there a very long time, wouldn't you?" Its features contorted in rage, and it lunged forward just as my third blow connected with the weakened ice. There was a moment of suspension, both of us looking down as the surface gave way beneath our combined weight, and then we were falling. The cold was beyond cold, an all-consuming burning sensation that drove the air from my lungs in a silent scream. Black water closed over my head, the creature's thrashing form visible as a darker shadow in the murk. Something seized my ankle, fingers too long and strong to be human, and pulled me deeper. I still had the ice axe somehow, gripped in a hand I could no longer feel. With the last of my strength, I swung it blindly downward. There was resistance, then a sound that carried clearly through the water. A high, bubbling shriek of pain. The grip on my ankle released. I don't remember swimming to the surface or pulling myself onto solid ice. I don't remember finding the shore or stumbling through the forest. My next clear memory is of sunlight and voices. Search and rescue personnel who'd been alerted when I failed to return my permitted wilderness itinerary on time. They found me huddled in a shallow cave less than a mile from the trailhead, severely hypothermic, babbling about people who weren't people and someone named Marcus who kept changing his face. They attributed my ramblings to hypothermia and possible carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camp stove, though I had no stove with me when they found me. The official report lists my experience as a solo hiker misadventure, with possible hallucinatory episodes due to exposure and hypoxia. They documented my injuries clinically: severe frostbite in both feet and my right hand, resulting in the amputation of 3 toes and 2 fingers. My right eardrum ruptured from the pressure of the freezing water. Various cuts and contusions consistent with moving through rough terrain at night. What the report doesn't mention: the bruises on my ankle in the distinct pattern of impossibly long fingers. The words in an unknown language that I sometimes speak in my sleep, according to the night nurse who later slipped me her number with a concerned look. The fact that 3 other hikers went missing in the Trinity Alps that same week, their bodies never recovered. I've moved away from California now, as far from mountains as I could reasonably get. I work remote IT jobs and rarely leave my apartment. But sometimes, on my rare grocery trips or doctor's appointments, I see them. Faces in the crowd that watch me with 2 wide smiles and eyes that don't reflect light properly. The red-bearded man at the bus stop. The dark-haired woman in the dentist's waiting room. They never approach. Just watch. I've started carrying salt in my pockets. Iron nails in a pouch around my neck. Superstitious nonsense, my therapist says. Trauma response. But she didn't see what crawled out of Marcus's skin when the salt hit. She didn't hear the voice that was 2 voices beneath the ice. Sometimes I wonder if I actually escaped, or if what's writing these words now is something that came back wrong from those mountains, a thing wearing Ethan Mercer's damaged body, practicing how to be human in the safety of a small apartment. After all, I've never felt quite right since then, never quite fitted back into my life, and sometimes, when I dream, I'm not running from the creature on that frozen lake. I'm chasing someone, hungry for more than just their flesh. My name is Emma Lawson. This happened in September of 2024, just before the autumn equinox. Before that weekend, I was merely a wildlife photographer with a broken heart and a mundane life. Now, I'm a survivor with nightmares that won't end, and the constant fear that what followed us home from Devil's Peak might one day find me again. It was Vanessa who suggested the trip. My best friend since college, she'd watched me spiral after Ryan walked out 6 months ago. "You need this, Em," she insisted, tucking her blonde hair behind her ear with that determined look I knew too well. 4 days in the Trinity Alps, capturing those fall colors for the magazine spread. No cell service, no reminders of him. I couldn't argue. Our boss at Wilderness Quarterly had been asking for fresh content, and the Trinity Alps wilderness in Northern California was perfect. Remote, pristine, and allegedly breathtaking in late September when the aspens turned golden. Besides, it wasn't just Vanessa and me. Marcus Chen, our magazine's level-headed field correspondent, would be there. We'd worked together for 3 years, and his calm demeanor always balanced Vanessa's spontaneity. "Derek's coming too," Vanessa added, a mischievous glint in her eye. Derek Hobbs was her new boyfriend of 2 months. Tall, ruggedly handsome, with intense eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. I'd met him twice and still couldn't decide if I liked him. There was something off about his smile, the way it never quite reached his eyes. 4 people, 4 days, Vanessa continued. We'll take the Canyon Creek Trail up to Devil's Peak. The views are supposed to be unreal. I should have noticed how strange it was that she picked Devil's Peak. Vanessa had always been superstitious, avoiding anything with ominous names. But I was too focused on packing my camera gear to question it. The trailhead was a 5-hour drive from San Francisco. We left at dawn in Marcus's SUV, the trunk packed with camping gear and my precious camera equipment. Vanessa chattered away in the back seat with Derek, who kept one arm draped possessively around her shoulders. In the front, Marcus and I discussed the route. "The Canyon Creek Lakes are about 7 miles in," he said, glancing at the trail map. "Pretty steep in sections, but the campsite there gives us access to several peaks, including Devil's Peak." "I've heard there are some unusual rock formations up there," I replied. "Ancient Native American sites, supposedly." Derek leaned forward between our seats. The Wintu tribe believed the area was spiritually significant, he said, his voice oddly flat. They warned against staying there after dark. Marcus chuckled. Good thing we're not superstitious. I caught Derek's reflection in the rearview mirror. He wasn't laughing. The trailhead parking lot was empty when we arrived around noon. September was late season for the Trinity Alps. Most hikers came in July and August when the alpine wildflowers bloomed. Now, the trails would be quiet, perfect for photography. No other cars, Marcus observed as we shouldered our packs. We'll have the place to ourselves. Derek stared at the forest edge. Not entirely to ourselves. What does that mean? I asked, adjusting my camera strap. He smiled that unsettling smile. Wildlife, bears, mountain lions, the usual. We started up the trail, with Marcus leading and me bringing up the rear. The first few miles were pleasant, a well-maintained path winding through old-growth forests of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. Vanessa pointed out wildflowers while Derek remained oddly silent, his eyes scanning the woods constantly. About 4 miles in, we came across a bizarre rock formation. 3 massive boulders balanced atop one another, forming what looked like a crude doorway. It wasn't on any of our trail maps. This is strange, Marcus said, circling the formation. Doesn't look natural. Derek placed his hand on the stones. It's a marker. For what? Vanessa asked. A boundary, he replied cryptically, then continued walking without explanation. That was when our phones died simultaneously. All 4 devices, fully charged that morning, suddenly went black. Marcus frowned at his GPS unit, which was also malfunctioning, displaying coordinates that kept shifting randomly. Electronic interference, he suggested, though he sounded uncertain. Maybe mineral deposits in these mountains. I felt the first twinge of unease. Can we still navigate without GPS? Marcus nodded, pulling out his paper map and compass. Old school. We're fine. We weren't fine. An hour later, the sky darkened unnaturally fast. What had been early afternoon suddenly looked like dusk. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees in minutes. Weather changes quickly in the mountains, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then came the fog. Thick, swirling mist that seemed to rise from the ground rather than descend from above. It enveloped us within seconds, reducing visibility to mere feet. Stay together, Marcus called. Everyone link hands. I felt Vanessa grab my hand from behind, her grip tight with fear. Marcus took my other hand. But before we could form a complete chain, a powerful gust of wind hit us, so strong it knocked me to my knees. I lost my grip on both Vanessa and Marcus. Marcus, I screamed. Vanessa. Their voices answered, but distorted, as if coming from much farther away than they should have been. Then silence, except for the wind whistling through trees I couldn't see. I called their names until my voice grew hoarse. The fog was disorienting, seeming to shift and move with purpose. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I heard footsteps approaching. Emma? It was Derek's voice. He emerged from the mist, looking strangely calm. Where are the others? I demanded. We got separated. I've been looking. His words were right, but something was wrong. He blinked too slowly, and his stance was slightly off, as if he wasn't quite comfortable in his own body. Are you okay? I asked, backing away slightly. He smiled that not quite right smile. Never better. We should make camp. It'll be dark soon. But Vanessa and Marcus, they'll find us if we stay put. He was already unslingling his pack. I saw a clearing just ahead. I had no better plan, so I followed him to a small flat area surrounded by massive pines. The fog had thinned somewhat, but darkness was falling rapidly. Derek efficiently set up his tent, his movements mechanical and precise. Aren't you worried about them? I asked as he gathered firewood. He paused, as if considering what the correct response should be. Of course. but panicking won't help." The words sounded rehearsed. I set up my own tent, keeping Derek in my peripheral vision. Something was definitely off about him. When he wasn't looking, I slipped my hunting knife from my pack into my jacket pocket. The fire refused to catch properly, despite the dry wood. The flames flickered with an unnatural bluish tinge when they did appear. Derek stared into the weak fire, his face expressionless. "Tell me about yourself, Emma," he said suddenly, his head turning toward me with an odd, jerky motion. "You already know me. We've met several times." He nodded mechanically. "Refresh my memory." To avoid conflict, I gave vague answers about my work as a photographer. Throughout our conversation, he never once mentioned Vanessa, his supposed girlfriend who was missing in the wilderness. Night fell completely. No sign of Marcus or Vanessa. No sounds from the forest, no insects, no nocturnal birds, nothing. Just unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional wind that didn't move the trees. "I'm going to try to find them," I said, reaching for my headlamp. Derek's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "Not safe at night." I pulled away. "They could be hurt." "Morning," he insisted. "Better in morning." His speech pattern had changed, becoming more fragmented. Even more alarming, when the firelight caught his eyes just right, they seemed to reflect light like an animal's. I retreated to my tent, zipping it firmly closed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I listened to Derek moving around the campsite for hours, his footsteps sometimes bipedal, sometimes sounding like something moving on all fours. Morning arrived with no dawn, just a gradual lightening of the perpetual fog. When I emerged from my tent, Derek was already standing at the edge of our camp, perfectly still, staring into the forest. "Did you sleep?" I asked, clutching my knife in my pocket. He turned with that too slow movement. "Yes. You?" Before I could answer, a shout echoed through the trees. "Emma! Derek!" Marcus's voice. Relief flooded through me as his figure materialized from the mist. He looked disheveled and exhausted, a bloody scratch across his cheek. "Thank God," he panted, bending over to catch his breath. "Been searching all night. Got completely turned around in that fog." Derek watched Marcus with an intensity that made me step between them. "Where's Vanessa?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "I thought she was with you." "We got separated in the fog," I explained. "None of us found her?" A look passed between the men, Marcus concerned, Derek blank. "We need to find her," Marcus insisted, "and get the hell out of here. This place isn't right." Derek's head tilted. "Not right how?" Marcus gestured vaguely. "This fog, for one, and I swear I saw the same landmarks multiple times even though I was walking in a straight line. It's like the landscape is changing." I felt cold despite the morning warming up. "We should pack up and start searching for Vanessa." As we gathered our gear, I pulled Marcus aside. "Watch Derek," I whispered. "He's acting strange." Marcus frowned. "Strange how?" "Just not like himself. Be careful around him." We set off in the direction Marcus thought he'd heard Vanessa's voice during the night. Derek led the way, moving with unnatural sure-footedness through the mist. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing denser, the undergrowth more tangled with each step. After an hour of hiking, we reached another strange rock formation. 3 stones balanced in a doorway shape, identical to the one we'd passed yesterday. "This is impossible," Marcus said. "We're miles from where we saw this yesterday." Derek placed his hand on the stones, just as he had before. "Boundary marker." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "What boundary?" His eyes met mine, and for an instant, they looked wrong, pupils elongated like a cat's. "Between worlds." Marcus stepped back. "We need to find Vanessa and get back to civilization, now." That's when we heard her scream. "Vanessa!" I shouted, running toward the sound without thinking. Marcus followed close behind. Derek moved too, but strangely, in a different direction. We broke into a small clearing where we found Vanessa kneeling on the ground, sobbing. Relief washed over me as I rushed to embrace her. "You're okay," I breathed. "We've been so worried." She looked up, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face. "Emma, is it really you?" "Of course it's me. What happened?" Her eyes darted fearfully around the clearing. "I got lost in the fog. Been wandering all night. But that's not—" She lowered her voice. "There's something out here with us. Something that looks like people but isn't." Marcus knelt beside us. "What do you mean?" "I saw Derek last night," she whispered. "But it wasn't him. He moved wrong, talked wrong. When I called out to him, he turned and—" She shuddered. His face rippled like it was trying to stay in place. Ice formed in my stomach. "Where did you see him?" "By a stream, about a mile back. He was—" She swallowed hard. "He was eating something. Something raw." "We were with Derek all morning," Marcus said, looking confused. "Then who did I see?" Vanessa's voice rose. As if summoned by our conversation, Derek appeared at the edge of the clearing. But, at the same time, impossibly, Derek also stepped out from behind a tree on the opposite side. 2 Dereks, identical down to their clothing, both watching us with those intense, wrong eyes. Vanessa screamed. Marcus leapt to his feet, pulling me and Vanessa up with him. "Run!" he shouted, pushing us toward a gap in the trees. We sprinted blindly through the forest, branches whipping our faces. I glanced back to see both Dereks in pursuit, moving with an inhuman loping gait, almost on all fours at times. In there, Marcus pointed to a narrow ravine. We squeezed through, emerging into a small box canyon with steep walls on 3 sides. A dead end. "We're trapped," Vanessa cried. Marcus looked around frantically. There must be a way up these walls. But before we could search, one Derek appeared at the ravine entrance. He stood watching us, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then his face began to shift. The skin rippled and flowed like wax melting. Vanessa screamed again as Derek's features dissolved and reformed into something only approximately human. The eyes too large, the mouth stretched impossibly wide. "What the fuck is that?" Marcus gasped. The thing that wasn't Derek spoke, its voice a grating parody of human speech. "Hungry." It stepped forward, joints bending wrong, movements jerky yet fluid in a way that defied anatomy. I pulled my knife, holding it out with shaking hands. "Stay back." The creature paused, studying the blade with curious eyes. Then it laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "Your name?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you?" "Many names," it replied. "Skinwalker, Wendigo, Mimic." Its head rolled unnaturally on its neck. "Gray Walker." "Where's the real Derek?" Vanessa sobbed. Gray Walker's grotesque approximation of a smile widened. "Here." It patted its stomach. Part of me now. His memories, his face, his essence. I felt vomit rise in my throat. This thing had killed Derek, consumed him somehow. "And soon," it continued, "you join, one by one. Already tasted her." It pointed at Vanessa, who flinched. I noticed then a small wound on Vanessa's arm, raw and infected looking. "Last night," Vanessa whispered, "it bit me while wearing Derek's face." Gray Walker took another step forward. She marked now. Mine already. "Watch." As if on cue, Vanessa doubled over, crying out in pain. When she straightened, something was different. Her eyes had that same wrong quality that Derek's had shown. "No," Marcus breathed. Vanessa, or what was becoming less Vanessa by the second, smiled with too many teeth. She moved to stand beside Gray Walker. "So hungry," she said in a voice that wasn't quite hers anymore. Marcus grabbed my arm. "We need to climb. Now!" We scrambled toward the canyon wall as both creatures advanced. I found footholds in the rough stone and began to climb. Marcus right below me. A hand grabbed his ankle. Vanessa, her face beginning to ripple and shift. "Let go!" he shouted, kicking free with a sickening crunch. Vanessa's wrist bent at an impossible angle, but she showed no pain, only snarled and leapt again. We climbed higher, fingers bleeding on the sharp rock. Below, Gray Walker began to climb too, moving like a spider, too fast. There, Marcus pointed to a narrow ledge above us that led around the canyon wall. We pulled ourselves up onto it, then edged along it until we found a small cave entrance partially hidden by brush. We squeezed inside just as Gray Walker reached the ledge. The cave went deeper than it appeared, opening into a larger chamber. Faint light filtered from a crack in the ceiling, illuminating ancient pictographs on the walls, crude humanoid figures with elongated limbs and animal heads. "We're trapped," I whispered. Marcus examined the paintings. "These look like warnings. The same figure appears throughout. I think it's depicting your Gray Walker." I noticed symbols that seemed to form a narrative. The creature consuming people, taking their forms, marking others who then transformed, and at the end, a figure driving what looked like a stake of antler or bone through the creature. "Look at this," I pointed. "I think it's showing how to kill it." Marcus nodded grimly. "A bone stake through the heart. Poetic." We heard scraping at the cave entrance, claws on stone. "It's coming," I hissed. Marcus looked around desperately, then pointed to a pile of bones in the corner. Animal remains, ancient and brittle. Among them was a deer's antler, still attached to a partial skull. "That could work," he said, moving to retrieve it. But as he crossed the cave floor, the ground gave way beneath him. He fell through with a startled cry, disappearing into darkness. "Marcus!" I screamed, rushing to the edge of the hole. I could see nothing below. A faint voice echoed up. "I'm okay. It's some kind of underground chamber. There's another passage down here." Relief flooded me, quickly replaced by terror as Gray Walker's distorted face appeared at the cave entrance. Behind it, the thing wearing Vanessa's face grinned with two sharp teeth. "Nowhere left," Gray Walker said, forcing its body through the narrow opening. It had shed most of Derek's appearance now, revealing its true form. Emaciated, gray-skinned, with joints that bent in wrong directions and fingers too long and sharp. I backed away, eyes darting between the creatures and the hole Marcus had fallen through. The Vanessa thing stayed at the entrance, blocking escape. Gray Walker gestured at the pictographs. "Ancient enemies. Tried to trap me. Kill me." It laughed that bone-breaking laugh. "Failed. Always fail." I lunged for the antler, grabbing it as Gray Walker sprang toward me. We collided, tumbling across the cave floor. Its strength was inhuman, pinning me down with terrifying ease. The skin of its face continued to shift, briefly showing flashes of Derek's features, then something monstrous underneath. "Your fear," it whispered, face inches from mine. "Delicious." Its jaws distended, unhinging like a snake's. I drove the antler upward with all my strength, aiming for its chest. It connected with a sickening crunch, sinking deep into the creature's body. Gray Walker shrieked, a sound so piercing I felt blood trickle from my ears. It thrashed atop me, black ichor pouring from the wound. I twisted the makeshift stake, driving it deeper. The creature convulsed, then collapsed onto me, its weight suddenly immense. I struggled to push it off, gasping for air. From the cave entrance, the Vanessa thing watched, its face contorting in what might have been pain or rage. Then, to my horror, it began to change. Not back to Vanessa, but into something similar to Gray Walker, as if the death of one allowed the birth of another. "Emma," Marcus's voice called from below, "there's a way out down here." With a final effort, I shoved Gray Walker's body aside and scrambled to the hole, looking down to see Marcus's face illuminated by his headlamp. "Jump," he urged. "I'll catch you." Behind me, the new creature took its first awkward steps into the cave, movements becoming more confident with each second. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the darkness, feeling Marcus's arms catch me. We tumbled backward onto hard stone. "This way," he gasped, pulling me to my feet. We staggered down a narrow tunnel, the beam of his headlamp bouncing wildly off wet walls. Behind us, something scraped and scratched, following. The tunnel twisted and turned, gradually sloping upward. My lungs burned, legs trembling with exhaustion. Just when I thought we couldn't go any farther, we rounded a bend and saw it. Daylight streaming through an opening ahead. We burst into sunlight, emerging from the mountainside onto a steep slope. Without pausing, we half ran, half slid down the incline, tumbling through undergrowth until we hit a trail, a different one than we'd hiked in on. "Don't stop," Marcus panted, blood streaming from a gash in his forehead. We ran until our bodies gave out, collapsing by a stream miles from the cave. As we gasped for breath, I realized the fog was gone. The sky a normal late afternoon blue. Birds sang in the trees. Everything seemed ordinary. "Do you think," I started, "it's following?" "Yes." Marcus looked back the way we'd come. "But I think we've crossed back over the boundary. It can't come this far, not in its true form." "Vanessa," I choked out. "She's gone, isn't she?" He nodded gravely. The moment it marked her. That bite. It was changing her. We followed the unfamiliar trail. Marcus limping badly from an injury I hadn't noticed before. Hours later, we stumbled onto a ranger station. The bewildered park ranger called for medical evacuation when he saw our condition. At the hospital, we told a sanitized version of events. Getting separated in unexpected fog, Vanessa and Derek still missing. Search parties found no trace of them, despite days of looking. Eventually, the search was called off. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead from exposure or wildlife attack. Marcus and I know better. Sometimes I dream about Vanessa, her body moving wrong, her smile too wide, hunting in those remote mountains. And sometimes when I look in the mirror after waking from those dreams, I swear my eyes look different for just a moment, reflecting light like an animal's. Marcus moved in with me after we were released from the hospital. His leg never healed properly. We tell people we bonded through trauma, which is true enough. But we also stay together because we understand each other's fear. The knowledge that somewhere in the Trinity Alps, something that wears our friends' faces is waiting. And worst of all is the certainty that someday it will find us again. Because in those last moments in the cave, as I drove the antler into Grey Walker's chest, I felt its teeth graze my arm, felt the burning sensation of its saliva entering my bloodstream. I haven't told Marcus. I check my eyes every morning, searching for signs of change. So far, nothing. But sometimes when I'm almost asleep, I feel a hunger that isn't quite my own, and I wonder how long I have before I too begin to change. Devil's Peak keeps its secrets, and now, so do I. The Hollow. My name is Mason Everett. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2024, though sometimes I still question whether it happened at all or if I've just lost my mind entirely. The doctors say writing it down might help. I doubt it, but here goes. I used to be a software developer for a fintech startup in San Francisco. The kind of place with ping pong tables nobody uses and motivational posters about disruption. 80-hour work weeks were standard. My girlfriend Elise had left 6 months prior, citing my emotional unavailability as the main reason. I couldn't really argue with her. The only living thing I managed to maintain a relationship with was my German Shepherd, Ranger. Ranger was the one constant in my life. 6 years old, loyal to a fault, with intelligent amber eyes that sometimes made me wonder if he understood more than he let on. He was the reason I still went outside at all, forcing me on walks when I'd otherwise have stayed hunched over my laptop until sunrise. The breaking point came during a product launch that went sideways. 3 months of work rendered useless by a last-minute pivot. I sat in my darkened apartment at 3 a.m., staring at nothing, when the thought first entered my mind. I need to get out of here. Really out. No service, no Slack notifications, no emails. Just me, Ranger, and silence. I put in for 2 weeks of emergency personal leave, packed my hiking gear, most of which hadn't been touched in years, and plotted a 7-day trek through the Trinity Alps wilderness. Remote enough to be a true escape, but established enough that a moderately experienced hiker like myself shouldn't face too much trouble. Or so I thought. The first day went exactly as planned. Ranger and I arrived at the Stewart Fork trailhead near Trinity Center around noon. The September air was crisp, carrying the first hint of the autumn to come. The trail started gently enough, winding through old-growth forests of pine and fir. The earthy scent of decomposing needles and the distant sound of running water immediately began working their magic. My shoulders, perpetually tensed from hunching over keyboards, started to release. "This is exactly what we needed, buddy," I said to Ranger, who trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back as if to make sure I was keeping up. His tail wagged in agreement. My plan was to head toward Caribou Lake, spending the first night at Emerald Lake before pushing on to the more remote areas. According to my research, the terrain would get considerably more challenging after that, but the solitude would be worth it. We made good time that first day. The trail was well marked, and I passed a few day hikers heading back toward the trailhead. An older couple with matching walking sticks wished me a good journey. A solo hiker in his 20s nodded as he passed, his eyes never meeting mine. Nothing unusual. By late afternoon, I'd reached my planned campsite near Emerald Lake and set up my tent. That first night remains the only peaceful one I experienced. I built a small fire, cooked a dehydrated meal that tasted better than it had any right to, and sat watching the flames dance while Ranger lay with his head on my feet. The stars emerged overhead in numbers you never see in the city. I felt something close to contentment for the first time in months. If only I'd turned back the next morning. Day 2 started with a low fog that clung to the surface of Emerald Lake and wound between the trees like ghostly fingers. I packed up camp after a quick breakfast and consulted my map and GPS. According to both, continuing northwest would take me toward Caribou Mountain and eventually Caribou Lake, where I planned to establish a base camp for a few days. The trail grew steeper and less defined. Loose rocks made footing treacherous in places, and I had to carefully pick my way up certain sections. Ranger, with his 4-wheel drive, had considerably less trouble, often waiting for me at the top of difficult stretches with what I swear was an impatient expression. Around midday, something odd happened. The trail forked where my map showed no divergence. Both paths looked equally well traveled. I checked my GPS, which showed my location but no trail details in either direction. After a moment's hesitation, I took the left fork, reasoning it headed more in the northwest direction I needed. Within an hour, I knew something was wrong. The terrain didn't match what I expected. Where there should have been a gradual ascent toward Caribou Mountain, I found myself descending into a densely wooded hollow. The trees here were different somehow, gnarled and ancient, their branches twisting together overhead to block much of the sunlight. The air felt heavy and still. I checked my GPS again. According to it, I was exactly where I should be on the trail to Caribou Lake, but that was clearly impossible given the landscape around me. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings and watched in disbelief as the needle spun lazily, never settling on north. "Equipment failure," I muttered, tapping the compass against my palm. It continued spinning. That's when I noticed Ranger's behavior had changed. Instead of ranging ahead as he had been all morning, he now stayed close to my side. His ears were perked forward, alert, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I asked, scanning the trees. Nothing moved except the occasional breeze through the branches. Ranger whined and pressed against my leg. "It's okay," I said, not believing it myself. "Let's just backtrack to the fork." We turned around and I tried to follow our own trail back. But somehow, it seemed to have vanished. Where there had been clear signs of our passage before, broken twigs, disturbed leaves. Now there was nothing. The forest floor appeared untouched. Panic began to rise in my chest. I forced it down, trying to think rationally. The sun was still visible in patches through the canopy. I could use it to navigate east, which should eventually lead us back to the main trail. We walked for what felt like hours. My watch said it was only 2:30 p.m., but the forest had darkened considerably, as if dusk was already falling. I was about to suggest to Ranger that we make camp early when we stumbled upon the cabin. It sat in a small clearing, weathered gray logs stacked haphazardly to form walls, a sagging roof covered in moss and pine needles. No smoke rose from the stone chimney. No sound came from within. It looked abandoned, had been for decades judging by its condition, yet something about it suggested recent occupation. The small patch of ground in front wasn't overgrown like the surrounding forest. Ranger stopped dead, hackles raised, and emitted a growl unlike any I'd heard from him before. Deep, threatening, and clearly terrified. "Easy," I said, laying a hand on his neck. His muscles were rigid under my fingers. Logic told me to avoid the cabin, to continue trying to find my way back to the trail. But exhaustion and growing fear of being lost overnight in these woods overrode my instincts. At the very least, the cabin would provide shelter. Perhaps there were even maps or other helpful items inside. "Come on," I said to Ranger, approaching the cabin slowly. He wouldn't budge. When I tugged gently on his leash, he sat firmly, amber eyes fixed on the cabin, and whined. "Fine. You can stay out here," I conceded, tying his leash to a nearby tree. "I'll just take a quick look." The door hung partially open on rusted hinges. It creaked loudly as I pushed it wider, sending dust motes swirling in the beam of late-afternoon sunlight that cut through the gloom. The interior was a single room with a collapsed bed frame in one corner, a rough-hewn table with a single chair, and a stone fireplace. Papers and what looked like old leather-bound books were scattered across the floor. Despite the disarray, there was that same strange sense of recent habitation. No cobwebs draped the corners. No small animal tracks marked the dusty floor except for my own fresh footprints. I knelt to examine one of the books, carefully opening its brittle cover. The handwritten text inside was faded but legible, a journal of some kind. I squinted in the dim light to make out the words. April 18th, 1852. The miners came again today, threatened to burn me out if I don't leave these mountains. They fear what they don't understand. The forest gives me what I need, and I give back in turn. The balance must be maintained. I flipped forward several pages. June 3rd, 1852. Found Erickson's boy wandering near the creek. Lost for 2 days, he said. Those woods have a way of turning a man around. I set him right, sent him home with a charm for protection. His father will still call me witch, but perhaps now his mother will convince him to leave me be. Another page. August 29th, 1852. They are coming. I can feel it. The trees whisper warnings. I have prepared the sacrifice. What lives in these woods must be fed, or it turns hungry eyes elsewhere. I will not be their victim. The final entry was written in a shaky, desperate hand. September 5th, 1852. They took me today, dragged me from my cabin, called me hag, devil woman, said I took the children. I tried to explain. The forest takes what it wants. I only guide it, channel it. They wouldn't listen. I am to hang tomorrow, but they don't understand. Death is not the end in these mountains. The balance must be maintained. I have made my arrangements. I will return, and they will pay for generations to come. The signature at the bottom read, Agatha Blackwell. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling afternoon air. I gently closed the journal, suddenly feeling like an intruder. The shadows in the corners of the cabin seemed to shift and deepen as the sun moved lower in the sky. Outside, Ranger began barking frantically. I shoved the journal into my pack without thinking and hurried out the door. Ranger was straining at his leash, barking at the tree line at the far side of the clearing. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. Just as I reached him, he fell silent, head cocked to one side as if listening. That's when I heard it. A child's laughter, distant but clear, coming from the direction Ranger had been barking. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" No response except another burst of laughter, slightly farther away. "Stay here," I told Ranger, but the moment I untied his leash, he bolted in the opposite direction from the laughter, disappearing into the trees. "Ranger!" I shouted, panic rising. "Ranger, come!" No answering bark, no rustling of underbrush to indicate his return. Just silence, then another echo of distant laughter. I stood frozen in indecision. Follow Ranger or investigate the laughter? Night was approaching quickly now, the forest already deep in shadow. Making camp near the cabin seemed increasingly unappealing after reading that journal, but striking out into unfamiliar terrain at dusk was equally dangerous. The decision was made for me when Ranger reappeared at the edge of the clearing, panting heavily. Relief flooded through me until I noticed something odd about his behavior. He didn't come to me as he normally would. Instead, he stood watching me with unusual stillness, his amber eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Ranger," I called softly. "Come here, boy." He took a step forward, then another, moving stiffly as if fighting against his own muscles. When he reached me, I knelt to check him over, finding nothing obviously wrong. But when I looked into his eyes, something seemed off. The intelligent warmth I knew so well was muted, distant. "What happened out there, buddy?" I whispered. He whined softly and licked my hand once, the gesture almost apologetic. With no better option, I decided to make camp for the night a short distance from the cabin. Something about sleeping inside those walls felt dangerous in a way I couldn't articulate. I found a small clearing about 50 yards away, set up my tent, and got a fire going as full darkness descended. Ranger refused to eat his dinner. Instead, lying at the edge of the firelight, eyes fixed on the darkness between us and the cabin. I forced myself to eat despite having little appetite, knowing I needed the energy. The events of the day had left me exhausted, but my mind raced with questions. Who was Agatha Blackwell? What had happened to her? And most importantly, how had I gotten so completely lost on what should have been a well-established trail? I checked my phone, no service as expected, and was shocked to see it was only 7:30 p.m. It felt much later, as if the day had stretched unnaturally long. My watch confirmed the time, yet I could have sworn I'd spent many more hours wandering these woods than the timeline allowed. As I stared into the fire, I became aware of a soft, rhythmic sound coming from the direction of the cabin. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone gently knocking on the door. Ranger's head snapped up, ears forward. "I don't hear anything," I lied to myself, and perhaps to Ranger as well. But the tapping continued, slightly louder now. The rational part of my brain suggested wind causing a loose board to knock against the cabin wall. The increasingly panicked part suggested I pack up right now and hike through the night, dangers be damned. I compromised by crawling into my tent, zipping it securely and trying to sleep with Ranger pressed against my side. The tapping eventually stopped, or perhaps I simply stopped noticing it as exhaustion claimed me. My dreams that night were fragmented and disturbing. I was running through endless forest, the trees gradually transforming into grasping hands that tore at my clothes and skin. A woman's voice called my name, over and over, growing more insistent with each repetition. Mason, Mason, Mason. I woke with a start, disoriented. The interior of the tent was pitch black. No moonlight filtered through the nylon walls. I reached for my phone to check the time and found it dead despite having over 60% battery when I'd fallen asleep. More disturbing was the absence of Ranger's warm body beside me. The spot where he'd been sleeping was cold, suggesting he'd been gone for some time. "Ranger?" I called softly, unzipping the tent flap. The clearing outside was transformed. A thick, unnatural fog covered everything, glowing faintly with its own inner light. My campfire was out, not even embers remaining. Through the mist, the dark shape of the cabin was just visible, and my heart stuttered. A light glowed in its single window where no light had been before. I called for Ranger again, louder this time. My voice seemed absorbed by the fog, traveling no distance at all. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put until daylight, I pulled on my boots and jacket and stepped out of the tent. The fog swirled around my legs, unnaturally cold and somehow heavy, as if it had physical substance. I took a few steps toward where I thought the cabin was and stumbled over something soft. Looking down, my blood froze. It was my backpack, which should have been inside the tent with me, opened and its contents strewn about. The journal I'd taken from the cabin lay open, its pages rustling despite the absolute stillness of the air. Next to it was Ranger's collar, but no sign of Ranger himself. Panic fully took hold now. I spun in place, calling Ranger's name over and over. The fog seemed to thicken with each shout, pressing in around me. I couldn't see my tent anymore. Couldn't see anything but swirling whiteness and the faint glow from the cabin window. With no better option, I moved toward that light, the only landmark in the formless mist. As I approached, I saw that the cabin had changed. The sagging roof had straightened. The weathered logs appeared almost new. Warm light spilled from the window and smoke rose from the previously dormant chimney. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I raised it to knock. Before my knuckles touched wood, the door swung open. A man stood there, perhaps in his mid-40s with a full beard and exhausted eyes. He wore modern hiking clothes similar to my own. "There you are," he said, as if he'd been expecting me. "Was wondering if you'd make it before dawn. Come in, come in." Too stunned to do anything else, I entered the cabin. The interior had transformed as completely as the exterior. The collapsed bed now stood sturdy in the corner, covered with fresh blankets. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. The table held an oil lamp, its flame the source of the light I'd seen, and 2 steaming mugs. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the man said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Richard Cortez." He extended a hand. Reflexively, I shook it, finding his palm ice cold despite the warmth of the cabin. "Mason Everett," I replied, then added, "Have you seen a dog? A German shepherd? He's mine, and he's missing." Richard's expression shifted subtly. "No dogs here, just you and me and her." "Her?" I asked, the hairs on my arms rising. Richard gestured to one of the mugs on the table. "Sit, drink. You look half frozen. We have much to discuss before she arrives. Who's coming? And what are you doing out here? Are you lost, too?" The questions tumbled out as I remained standing, unwilling to accept his hospitality. "Lost?" Richard smiled thinly. "No, Mason. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. As are you, though you don't realize it yet." He took a sip from his own mug. "We've been waiting for you. The sign said someone was coming. Someone suitable." "Signs? What are you talking about? I need to find my dog and get back to the main trail." I backed toward the door. Richard's smile vanished. "Your dog is gone, and you won't be leaving these woods. Not really. Parts of you might walk out, but what matters most will stay forever." He set down his mug with deliberate care. "She's chosen you, Mason, just as she chose me 5 years ago." "She? You mean Agatha? The woman from the journal?" I asked, my hand finding the doorknob behind me. Richard's eyes widened slightly. "You've read her words already? That's unusual. She normally doesn't reveal herself so quickly." He cocked his head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "Perhaps you're more receptive than most. That would explain why your companion turned so easily." A horrible suspicion formed in my mind. "What did you do to Ranger?" "I did nothing. The forest takes what it wants." what she wants. Richard stood, and I noticed for the first time how unnaturally fluid his movements were, as if his joints worked differently than a human's should. Your dog serves her now, as I do. As you will. I threw open the door and bolted into the fog. Behind me, Richard's voice called out with unnatural resonance. Run, if you must. The paths all lead back to her. The fog seemed alive now, tendrils of it reaching for me as I stumbled forward blindly. I had no idea which direction I was heading, only that I needed to get away from the cabin, away from Richard with his cold hands and wrong movements. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to buckle. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, the fog momentarily cleared enough for me to see I was in an unfamiliar part of the forest. The trees here were even more distorted, their trunks twisted into humanoid shapes, branches like reaching arms. And then I heard Ranger's bark. Ranger, I shouted, hope surging. Here, boy. The barking came again, closer this time. I moved toward it, pushing through dense underbrush. Ranger, come. He appeared suddenly before me, materializing from the fog like an apparition. Relief flooded through me until I saw his eyes, glowing an unnatural green in the darkness. Nothing like their usual warm amber. Ranger, I whispered. He growled, low and threatening, a sound I'd never heard him direct at me before. It's me, boy, I said, reaching a trembling hand toward him. What happened to you? Ranger's form seemed to shimmer, becoming momentarily indistinct around the edges. When he solidified again, his fur appeared matted with something dark and wet that I refused to identify as blood. He's mine now, came a woman's voice from behind me. I spun to find myself face to face with what I can only describe as a nightmare given flesh. She had the general shape of a woman, tall and gaunt, dressed in ragged clothes that might once have been a pioneer woman's dress. But her proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, fingers ending in points rather than nails. Her face was the worst part. Sunken cheeks, skin like aged parchment stretched too tight over prominent bones, and eyes that glowed with the same unnatural green light as Ranger's. Agatha, I breathed, the name leaving my lips without conscious thought. She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. You know my name. Good. Richard has prepared you well. He hasn't prepared me for anything, I said, backing away. I just want to find my way out of these woods. Agatha's unnaturally long arm shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist with a grip so cold it burned. These are my woods, Mason Everett. No one leaves without my permission, and I rarely give it. Her head tilted at an impossible angle. Usually, I keep a piece of them here. The best piece. The soul, you might call it. What do you want from me? I asked, trying to pull free of her grasp. A new vessel, Richard said, appearing from the fog beside her. Mine is wearing thin. As if to demonstrate, he rolled up his sleeve to reveal skin that was sloughing off in gray patches, exposing something underneath that wasn't bone or muscle but a black, tar-like substance. 5 years is about the limit, Agatha said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than the apparent rotting of Richard's body. Then I need someone new, someone strong. You'll do nicely. With strength born of pure terror, I tore free from her grip and ran blindly into the fog. Behind me, I heard her laughter, Richard's voice calling out that it was useless to run, and worst of all, Ranger's bark as he gave chase. I crashed through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The fog parted and closed around me like a living thing, sometimes revealing glimpses of my surroundings only to obscure them again before I could get my bearings. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours that I ran, pursued by inhuman footsteps and the occasional flash of green eyes in the darkness. Eventually, I broke through the tree line into another clearing and nearly cried with relief when I saw my tent still standing there, exactly as I'd left it. I had somehow circled back to my camp. I fumbled with the tent zipper, thinking only of grabbing whatever supplies I could before continuing to flee. As I reached inside, a hand fell on my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around with my fist raised, only to find myself face to face with myself. It was me, or something wearing my face with imperfect precision. The eyes were wrong, flat, emotionless, the smile too wide, showing too many teeth. "Going somewhere?" my doppelganger asked, its voice an unsettling approximation of my own. I stumbled backward, falling through the tent flap. Inside, where it should have been empty, sat Richard, cross-legged on my sleeping bag. "I told you," he said. "All paths lead back to her." I scrambled out the other side of the tent, only to find Agatha waiting, her 2 long fingers stroking Ranger's head. My dog, or the thing that had been my dog, stared at me with those terrible green eyes. "Enough games," Agatha said. "The sun will rise soon, and the transfer must be completed before dawn." Richard emerged from the tent and gripped my arms from behind. I fought, but his strength was inhuman. The doppelganger approached, its face beginning to melt and reform into something else. Agatha's features struggling to emerge from beneath a copy of my own. "Don't fight it," Richard whispered in my ear. "It only hurts if you resist. Let her in, and you'll experience wonders beyond imagining. Power beyond measure." "I don't want power," I gasped, still struggling. "I just want to go home." "This is your home now," Agatha said, reaching for my face with those elongated fingers. "These woods, this hollow. Give yourself to me, and parts of you will live forever." Her cold fingers touched my forehead, and immediately pain shot through my entire body. It felt like ice spreading through my veins, seeping into every cell. I screamed, a sound that didn't seem human even to my own ears. Through the haze of agony, I became aware of another sound. Ranger, the real Ranger, growling. Not at me, but at Agatha. Something in him was fighting her influence. "Impossible," she hissed, turning toward him. "You are mine, beast. Obey." Ranger's growl deepened and he crouched as if to spring. The green glow in his eyes flickered, amber showing through in flashes. "Ranger," I gasped. "Help me, boy." That was all it took. With a snarl that sounded like it came from the depths of hell itself, Ranger launched himself not at me, but at Agatha. His teeth sank into the arm she had extended toward me. She shrieked, a sound that split the air and made the trees themselves seem to bend away. Black ichor poured from the wound where Ranger's teeth tore her ancient flesh. Richard's grip on me loosened as he turned toward the commotion, and I seized the opportunity. I drove my elbow back into his stomach with all my strength. It connected with a sound like a rotten melon splitting open, and his hands fell away. I didn't look back, didn't try to understand what I just felt give way inside Richard's body. I lunged for my tent, grabbing the hunting knife I kept in my pack. Not much of a weapon, but the only one I had. When I turned back, chaos reigned. Ranger and Agatha were locked in combat, my loyal dog somehow managing to hold his own against the supernatural horror. Richard was bent double, black ooze pouring from his mouth and the spot where I'd struck him. The doppelganger was halfway transformed into something no longer human, its features fluid and uncertain. "Ranger!" I shouted. "To me!" Whether he understood or simply reacted to the command we'd practiced countless times, Ranger disengaged from Agatha and bounded to my side, his muzzle stained black with her impossible blood. "Good boy," I breathed, then turned to face our attackers, knife raised. "Stay back, all of you." Agatha straightened, her arm hanging at an odd angle where Ranger had mauled it. "Brave," she said, voice like stones grinding together, "but futile. Dawn approaches. One way or another, you will be mine." As if on cue, the fog began to lighten infinitesimally. Somewhere beyond the trees, the sun was beginning to rise. "Richard," Agatha snapped, "take him." Richard straightened with visible effort, more black fluid dripping from between his lips. He took one shambling step toward me, then another. I raised the knife higher. "Stay back." he ignored the warning, reaching for me with hands that now seemed to be molting, flesh sloughing off to reveal the darkness beneath. "Ranger, defend!" I commanded. My dog launched himself at Richard, catching the man's arm in powerful jaws. Richard didn't cry out in pain. Instead, he looked down at Ranger with an expression almost like relief. "Thank you," he whispered. Then his body simply collapsed. There's no other word for it. Like a puppet with its strings cut, he folded in on himself, flesh dissolving into a puddle of that black, tar-like substance. Only his clothes remained solid, empty shells on the ground. Agatha screamed in rage. "What have you done? He was mine!" The doppelganger, still caught in mid-transformation, let out a similar shriek and began to melt in the same way, as if Richard's dissolution had triggered its own. I backed away, Ranger at my side as Agatha advanced on us. The sky continued to lighten, paling from black to deep blue. The fog thinned further with each passing moment. "You cannot escape," Agatha snarled, though there was a new note in her voice. Urgency, perhaps even fear. "These are my woods, my hollow." "The sun's coming up," I said, sudden understanding dawning. "You're running out of time, aren't you?" Her altered face contorted with rage. "I have existed in these mountains for centuries. I will exist for centuries more, and you will serve me, Mason Everett, whether in this life or the next." She lunged for me with supernatural speed. I slashed wildly with the knife, feeling it connect with something that wasn't flesh or bone but yielded nonetheless. More black ichor sprayed from the wound, some of it splattering across my face and hands. It burned like acid and I cried out in pain. Ranger attacked again, going for her legs this time. Together we fought as the sky continued to lighten, minute by precious minute. Agatha seemed to be weakening, her movements becoming erratic, desperate. And then, just as the first direct rays of sunlight pierced the canopy, she made one final, frenzied grab for me. Her elongated fingers closed around my throat, burning cold. I plunged my knife into her chest, again and again, each strike releasing more of that caustic black fluid. "If I die," she rasped, "you die with me. You are marked now, mine forever." Ranger leapt, sinking his teeth into her throat. With a sound like tearing parchment, her head separated from her body. The fingers around my throat spasmed once, then released as her form began to dissolve like Richard's had. The last thing I saw before her face melted away was her eyes. Human now, filled with centuries of hatred, and her mouth forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "I'll be waiting." Then she was gone, nothing but black sludge seeping into the forest floor. As the sunlight strengthened, even that disappeared, absorbed by the earth as if it had never existed. I collapsed to my knees, every part of me trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. Ranger pressed against my side, whining softly and licking my face. His eyes were the familiar amber again, no trace of that unnatural green glow. "Good boy," I whispered, burying my face in his fur. "The best boy." We stayed that way for a long time until the morning was fully established and birds began to sing in the trees around us. The cabin was gone, not ruined or collapsed, but completely absent, as if it had never stood in the clearing at all. My tent. My name is Sarah Evans. This happened in August of 2024. I've spent the last 8 months trying to piece together what really occurred in the remote wilderness of California's Lost Sierra. The doctors say writing it down might help process the trauma. I'm not sure anything will help, but I need to try. Maybe someone will find this and stay away from that place. Maybe someone will believe me. I'm a wildlife photographer by trade. At 32, I'd built a modest reputation capturing images of elusive North American predators in their natural habitats. The Lost Sierra region had been on my bucket list for years, a relatively untouched wilderness with diverse ecosystems spanning from alpine lakes to dense forests. When my friend Lisa suggested a week-long backpacking trip there, I jumped at the chance. Lisa Chen and I had been friends since college. She was brilliant, a biologist specializing in freshwater ecosystems. And this trip would give her a chance to collect samples from some pristine alpine lakes. The third member of our expedition was my ex-boyfriend, Mark Peterson. We'd ended things amicably a year ago, remaining friends, and his experience as an outdoor guide made him the perfect addition to our group. He knew the backcountry better than anyone I'd ever met. The Sierra Buttes trail system is extensive, Mark explained during our planning session at my Oakland apartment. He spread a topographic map across my coffee table, tracing routes with his finger. But I want to take you guys off the beaten path. Up to the Lakes Basin area, Gold Lake, Salmon Lake, Goose Lake, they're all gorgeous, and the wildlife is abundant because fewer people venture out there. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Perfect for my research. Those isolated ecosystems are likely to have unique microbiological profiles. I studied the map, noticing how far we'd be from civilization. Cell reception. Mark shook his head. Spotty at best, non-existent at worst. We'll bring the satellite phone for emergencies. In retrospect, I should have paid attention to the uneasiness I felt looking at those remote areas on the map. Something about the way the contour lines crowded together, creating shadowed valleys and secluded hollows, stirred a primal warning in my gut. But I dismissed it as pre-adventure jitters. We set out on a clear Tuesday morning in August, driving Mark's Jeep Cherokee up winding mountain roads until we reached the trailhead near Graygull. The air was crisp and scented with pine, the sky a perfect cloudless blue that photographs can never quite capture. We shouldered our packs, mine heavier than usual with camera equipment, and started the hike to our first campsite near Grass Lake. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. I photographed a black bear and her cubs from a safe distance, captured stunning shots of osprey diving into the lake for fish, and even managed a few frames of a secretive pine marten slinking through underbrush. We made camp as the sun began to set, pitching our tents in a small clearing near the shore. Mark built a fire, Lisa collected water samples, and I set up my portable charging station for my camera batteries. "This is paradise," Lisa said, holding a vial of lake water up to the fading light. "Pristine, untouched." Mark stirred a pot of dehydrated stew over the fire. "Wait until you see what's deeper in. There are places in these mountains where you can feel like the first human to ever set foot there." "Any local legends I should know about for my photo captions?" I asked, half joking. "Every wilderness has its ghost stories." Mark's expression shifted subtly. "A few. These mountains were gold country. Lot of death during the rush. Mining accidents, claim disputes, starvation during harsh winters." "Spill it, Peterson," Lisa nudged. "You clearly have a story." He hesitated, then shrugged. "There's talk among the old-timers about the widow of Fraser Falls, supposedly the wife of a miner who was murdered for his claim. Story goes, she died searching for her husband in a blizzard, and now her spirit lures hikers off trails to share her fate." "Charming bedtime story," I laughed, but Lisa didn't join in. She was staring into the darkness beyond our fire. Her brow furrowed. "You okay?" I asked. She blinked rapidly. "Yeah, just thought I saw... nothing. Probably a deer." That night I slept fitfully, waking several times to what sounded like whispers just outside my tent. Too articulate to be wind, too persistent to be wildlife. Each time I unzipped the door to check, I found nothing but moonlight casting strange shadows through the trees. The next morning, Lisa seemed distant during breakfast. She'd always been chatty over coffee, planning the day's activities with enthusiasm, but now she was quiet, her movements mechanical as she packed her gear. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "Didn't sleep well. Weird dreams." We hiked deeper into the wilderness that day, climbing switchbacks toward the higher elevations of the Sierra Buttes. The landscape grew increasingly rugged, massive granite outcroppings jutting from dense pine forests. By mid-afternoon, We reached a viewpoint overlooking a spectacular valley, mountains stacked to the horizon. I set up my tripod to capture the panorama when my camera malfunctioned. The fully charged battery suddenly drained. "That's weird," I muttered, swapping it for my spare, which showed the same empty status despite being charged that morning. Mark checked his GPS. "That's strange." "What is it?" I asked, still fiddling with my camera. "According to this, we've been walking southeast, but we should have been heading northeast all morning." He frowned, looking up at the sun. "That can't be right. The sun confirms we've been going northeast." "Technology," Lisa said flatly, "always fails when you need it most." "That's why I brought these." Mark pulled out a topographic map and compass from his pack. He studied them for a moment. Orientation confirmed. "GPS must be glitching with the terrain. We're on track." We continued toward our planned campsite at Salmon Lake, but I couldn't shake a growing sense of disorientation. The forest seemed to shift around us, landmarks I'd noted mentally somehow appearing at impossible angles. Twice I was certain we'd pass the same distinctive boulder. Despite Mark's insistence, we were on a straight path. We reached the lake an hour later than planned, the sun already sinking behind the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly, and a mist began rising from the water's surface, curling between the trees like seeking fingers. "Let's set up quickly," Mark suggested, eyeing the mist with apparent concern. "Nights get cold up here fast." As Lisa and I pitched our tents, Mark gathered firewood, disappearing briefly into the tree line. When he returned, his arms loaded with branches, his face was pale. "You look like you've seen a ghost," I said, hammering in a tent stake. "Just thought I heard something," he replied, but his typical confidence had faltered. "Probably nothing." That night around the campfire, the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. The flames cast exaggerated shadows, and the darkness beyond our small circle of light seemed absolute, swallowing the beams of our headlamps when we looked into it. Lisa volunteered for the first watch. We'd decided someone should stay awake after finding fresh mountain lion tracks near camp. I retreated to my tent, exhausted from the day's hike, and fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. I dreamt of cold hands touching my face, of whispers in a language I couldn't understand but somehow recognized on a primal level. I dreamt of being watched by countless eyes hidden in the forest. A scream tore me from sleep, a sound so raw and terrified that I was out of my sleeping bag and unzipping my tent before fully conscious. Outside, the fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see Mark emerging from his tent, looking as disoriented as I felt. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "Lisa," I called, noticing her empty camp chair. "Lisa." No answer came from the darkness. "She was supposed to wake me for second watch," Mark said, grabbing his headlamp and switching it on. The beam cut weakly through the mist that had grown thicker while we slept. "Lisa," he shouted again. We searched the immediate area round camp, finding nothing. Her tent was empty, her sleeping bag still neatly rolled. Her pack remained propped against a tree, but her water sampling kit was gone. She must have gone to the lake, I reasoned, trying to keep panic at bay. Maybe she fell in. We rushed to the water's edge, calling her name. The lake's surface was unnaturally still, reflecting a sky now clouded over, moonlight diffused to a sickly glow. No sign of Lisa. No response to our increasingly desperate calls. "We need to contact rescue," I said, reaching for the satellite phone in my pack pocket. I powered it on, but the screen remained black despite its full charge that morning. "Fuck," Mark whispered. "This isn't right. None of this is right." A branch snapped in the forest beyond the shore, and we both whirled toward the sound. My headlamp caught a figure standing between two distant pines. Lisa, oddly still, head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Lisa," I called, relief flooding through me. "We were worried sick." She didn't respond, didn't move except for a slow, mechanical straightening of her head. Then she turned and walked deeper into the forest. "Lisa, wait!" Mark shouted, already moving after her. I followed, struggling to keep up as we pursued her through increasingly dense underbrush. My headlamp beam bounced chaotically, catching glimpses of her, always just ahead, moving with unnatural speed and grace over fallen logs and uneven ground. "This doesn't make sense," Mark panted beside me. "She doesn't even have a light. How can she see where she's going?" After what felt like an hour of pursuit, we broke into a small clearing and found Lisa standing in its center, back to us, completely motionless. A thin shaft of moonlight breached the clouds, illuminating her in an almost theatrical spotlight. "Lisa?" I approached slowly. "Are you okay?" She turned and I nearly screamed. It was Lisa, her face, her body. But something was profoundly wrong. Her eyes reflected my headlamp with a red gleam, like an animal's. Her usual warm expression was gone, replaced by a blank mask. Most disturbing was her smile, too wide, showing too many teeth. "I'm fine, Sarah," she said, her voice carrying an unfamiliar cadence. "I found something wonderful. I want to show you." Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me back a step. "Where did you go? Why didn't you answer when we called?" Lisa's head tilted again at that impossible angle. I heard a woman crying. I followed her voice. Her smile widened further. "She's lonely. She wants to meet you both." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crawled up my spine. "Lisa, you're scaring me. Let's go back to camp. We can talk about this in the morning." "It's not far," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Just beyond the ridge. Beautiful place. Hidden place." She pointed into the darkness beyond the clearing. "She's waiting." Mark's grip on my arm tightened. "We're going back to camp. Now." His voice was firm but underlined with fear. "You're coming with us, Lisa." When he stepped toward her, Lisa's expression changed, just for a moment, into something ancient and hateful. Then it was gone. Her face again a distorted version of my friend's. "Of course," she said pleasantly. "Lead the way." The walk back to camp was excruciating. Lisa followed a few paces behind us, humming tunelessly. Twice I caught her watching me with that wrong smile when she thought I wasn't looking. Whatever had happened to her in the forest, the woman walking behind us was not entirely Lisa Chen anymore. Back at camp, Mark restarted the fire while I watched Lisa. She moved methodically around her tent, arranging and rearranging items from her pack with obsessive precision. When she caught me staring, she waved with childlike enthusiasm, her movements puppet-like. "We need to get her out of here," I whispered to Mark. "Something's wrong with her." He nodded grimly. "First light, we head back to the trailhead. Keep the satellite phone close. If it starts working..." He trailed off. "What do you think happened to her?" I asked. Mark glanced over at Lisa, who was now sorting small stones by size, completely absorbed in the meaningless task. "I don't know, but I've heard stories. Hikers coming back different after getting lost. Rangers call it wilderness psychosis, brought on by dehydration, isolation, fear." He paused. "But this feels different." "The widow," I whispered, remembering his story. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Neither of us slept that night. We took turns watching the fire and watching Lisa, who sat cross-legged by her tent, staring into the darkness with unblinking eyes. Occasionally she would whisper something too quiet to hear, as if conversing with an unseen companion. Morning brought no sun, just a lightening of the persistent mist to a pale gray shroud. We packed silently, Lisa moving with mechanical efficiency. As Mark had planned, we headed back toward the trailhead, though getting Lisa to follow proved challenging. "We need to go that way," she said repeatedly, pointing deeper into the wilderness. "She's expecting us. So rude to leave without saying hello." "Another time," Mark replied firmly, taking her by the elbow to guide her along our return path. The forest felt wrong as we hiked. Too quiet, devoid of the birds and small mammals that should have been abundant. Our footsteps made no sound on the carpet of pine needles. Even the wind had died, leaving the mist hanging motionless between the trees. After 2 hours of hiking, Mark stopped abruptly, consulting his map and compass with growing confusion. "This can't be right," he muttered. "What is it?" I asked, keeping one eye on Lisa, who was smiling that horrible smile again. "According to the compass, we've been heading southwest, away from the trailhead." "You're lost," Lisa said, her voice lilting in a sing-song tone. "She doesn't want you to leave yet." Mark ignored her, looking up to get his bearings from the sun, but the sky remained a uniform gray. "Let's try again. The trail should cut east here." He pointed to our right. "That way." We changed direction, pushing through denser forest now. I felt increasingly certain we were being watched, that something was keeping pace with us just beyond the veil of mist. Twice I caught glimpses of movement at the periphery of my vision. A figure darting between distant trees, always female, always too quick to focus on. Around midday, we stopped in a small clearing to rest and check our location. Mark's growing frustration was evident as he pored over his map. "None of this makes sense," he said. "These landmarks don't match where we should be. It's like the forest is changing around us." "It is," Lisa said matter-of-factly. "She does that. Changes things, moves things. It's her forest now." I grabbed her shoulders. "Lisa, snap out of it. Who are you talking about? What happened to you last night?" For a brief moment, genuine fear flashed across her features, my real friend surfacing from whatever dark tide had submerged her. "Sarah, help me," she whispered, her voice suddenly her own again. I can feel her in my head. She's so angry, so cold. Then her expression smoothed, the alien smile returning. "Lisa isn't available right now," she said, voice once again carrying that strange cadence. "But I can take a message." Mark pulled me away from her. "We need to keep moving," he said quietly. "Try to reach the ridge. If we can get above the tree line, maybe we can orient ourselves." We continued hiking upward, the slope growing steeper. Lisa followed docilely now, humming that tuneless melody. The mist thickened as we climbed until visibility was reduced to just a few yards ahead. Without warning, the trees ended, and we found ourselves at the edge of a small, perfectly circular pond, its black water absolutely still despite the strengthening wind. The pond sat in a depression surrounded by a ring of twisted, ancient-looking pines, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that filtered the gray light into something even dimmer. "This isn't on the map," Mark said, voice hushed. Lisa clapped her hands with childish delight. "We're here. She'll be so pleased." "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Mark's arm. "Now." But as we turned to retreat into the forest, we found only solid rock behind us, a sheer cliff face where moments before there had been a path. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The forest had closed around us, hurting us exactly where it, or something within it, wanted us to go. "No, no, no," Mark muttered, running his hands over the stone as if searching for a hidden passage. "This is impossible." "Not impossible," Lisa said, wandering toward the pond's edge. "Just improbable. Reality is more flexible than you think, especially in thin places like this." She crouched, trailing her fingers through the black water, places where the boundaries wear thin. The wind picked up suddenly, swirling the mist into ghostly shapes above the pond's surface. A low moaning filled the air. Not wind through trees, but something almost vocal, almost words. "She's coming," Lisa said happily. "She's been so lonely." The mist coalesced, thickening over the center of the pond into an approximation of a human figure. Female, draped in what looked like tattered clothing from another century. Though composed only of swirling vapor, the figure had definition, the suggestion of a gaunt face, hollow eyes, reaching arms. "Dear God," Mark whispered, backing away until he hit the cliff. Lisa stood, arms outstretched in welcome. "I brought them, just like you asked," she called to the misty apparition. 2 more to keep you company." The figure began moving toward the shore, not gliding over the water but walking on it, each step sending ripples across the previously undisturbed surface. As it approached, I could make out more details. The tattered remains of what might once have been a wedding dress, now dirty and decayed, long hair floating as if underwater, skin blue-white with death. Mark fumbled with his pack, pulling out a flashlight, a powerful one he used for night hiking. He switched it on, the bright beam cutting through the mist, momentarily dispersing parts of the approaching figure. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The apparition let out a shriek of rage that vibrated in my bones, and Lisa collapsed to the ground, body contorting in unnatural spasms. "The light hurts it," Mark shouted above the wind and that terrible shrieking. "We need to go. Now." He kept the beam trained on the mist woman, who seemed unable to fully reform in its glare. I rushed to Lisa, who had stopped convulsing and now lay unconscious. "Lisa!" I shook her. "Lisa, wake up!" Her eyes fluttered open, her normal eyes filled with pain and confusion. "Sarah? Where are we?" Her voice was her own again. "No time," I said, pulling her to her feet. "We need to run." "But where?" The cliff behind us remained solid, and the only visible exit from the pond clearing was on the far side, past the shrieking apparition. Mark seemed to reach the same conclusion. "We have to go through it," he said, voice tight with controlled panic. "The light seems to weaken it. Stay close behind me." With Lisa still dazed between us, we began edging around the pond's perimeter. Mark kept his light trained on the mist figure, which retreated slightly from the beam but continued its unearthly howling. The wind whipped violently now, clawing at our clothes and hair, carrying whispers that somehow cut through the shrieking, promises, threats, pleas for companionship in that lonely, forgotten place. We were halfway around when Lisa suddenly stiffened, her eyes rolling back in her head. "She's coming back," she gasped. "I can't stop her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her body went rigid, then relaxed in a way that suggested something else now controlled its movements. "That's cheating," she said in that wrong voice, and before I could stop her, she lunged at Mark, clawing for the flashlight. Mark stumbled backward in surprise, momentarily lowering the light. In that instant, the mist surged forward, enveloping him in its cold embrace. I heard his scream, a sound of pure terror that I'll never forget, as the formless cloud tightened around him like constricting bands. The flashlight fell from his hand, rolling to the pond's edge where Lisa quickly snatched it up. "Mark!" I screamed, lunging toward him, but Lisa grabbed my arm with inhuman strength. "Your turn will come," she said, smiling that terrible smile. "She's been alone so long. She needs friends who can never leave." Within the mist, I could see Mark struggling, his movements growing weaker as the apparition seemed to solidify around him, through him. His scream became a choked gurgle, then silence. When the mist retreated moments later, he crumpled to the ground, his body shriveled as if all moisture had been extracted from it, skin stretched tight over bones in a grotesque mummification. I broke free from Lisa's grip and ran, not toward Mark's body, which I knew instinctively was beyond help, but toward the gap in the trees that appeared to lead away from the pond. Behind me, Lisa laughed, a sound containing nothing of my friend. "Run, little rabbit," she called. "The woods are hers. All paths lead back here eventually." I didn't look back, plunging into the forest with no plan beyond putting distance between myself and the horror at the pond. The mist swirled around me, sometimes taking on partial human shapes that reached with gossamer fingers before dissolving. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs trembled with exhaustion. Just as Lisa had predicted, I found myself approaching water again, but not the same pond. This was larger, an actual lake that I recognized with a surge of hope. Gold Lake, one of the landmarks on our original route. Somehow, whether through luck or the forest's momentary inattention, I'd found my way back to a real place marked on our maps. Darkness was falling rapidly now, but I pushed on along the lakeshore, eventually spotting something that made me sob with relief, a marked trail sign. I followed it doggedly as night closed in completely, using my headlamp to keep to the path. Each sound from the surrounding forest sent spikes of terror through me. Was it Lisa following, or something worse? I hiked through the night, terrified to stop. Dawn found me stumbling, lightheaded from exhaustion and dehydration, but still moving. The trail widened, showing more frequent signs of human passage. When I finally encountered a group of day hikers heading up from the trailhead, I collapsed, babbling about Lisa and Mark and the thing in the mist. They got me to a ranger station, where I told my story again and again. To rangers, to search and rescue teams, finally to police. No one believed me, of course. They attributed my story to exposure, dehydration, possibly toxic plants I might have inadvertently ingested. Search parties found no sign of Mark or Lisa in the areas I described. No pond matching my description was located. The satellite phone, when examined, worked perfectly. After 3 days, they found Lisa wandering near Gold Lake, dehydrated and confused. She remembered nothing of our ordeal, claiming we'd gotten separated during a routine hike. With no evidence of foul play and Mark still missing, the authorities focused their investigation on him. Perhaps he'd had an accident. Perhaps he'd abandoned us. Perhaps, some suggested quietly, I had something to do with his disappearance. I was hospitalized briefly for physical exhaustion and what doctors termed an acute stress reaction. Lisa visited once, sitting silently by my bedside. When I finally gathered courage to meet her eyes, I saw only my old friend. Concerned, caring, with no trace of that wrong smile or unnatural movement. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "I have dreams sometimes," she said quietly. "About a woman in the mist. About Mark. About things I might have done." She turned back, her expression haunted. "Are they just dreams, Sarah?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The search for Mark was eventually abandoned. I've recovered physically, but sleep remains elusive. When I do manage it, I dream of mist forming into outstretched hands, of pathways that loop back on themselves, of my friend's face stretched into that terrible smile. Lisa and I don't speak anymore. I saw her once, months later, at a coffee shop in Oakland. She waved cheerfully, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something ancient and cold looking out through her eyes. I left without acknowledging her. I haven't touched my camera since returning. I've moved to Southern California, as far from the Sierra Nevada range as I can get while still remaining in the state. But sometimes, on foggy mornings, I find myself staring into the mist, wondering if it's watching back. I know she's still out there, the widow of Fraser Falls, waiting in her forest, collecting companions to share her lonely eternity. I know that someday Lisa will return to her, and I know, with bone-deep certainty, that eventually she'll come for me too. There are places in this world where reality thins, where what we think we understand about nature's laws proves tragically insufficient. If you find yourself in the Lost Sierra, stick to marked trails. If mist rises suddenly from still water, run. And if you meet a woman named Lisa Chen with a too-wide smile who wants to show you something wonderful just beyond the ridge, turn back while you still can. My name is Grace Winters. This happened in September 2024. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that something is watching me through my bedroom window. I've moved 3 times since then. It doesn't matter. The fear follows me everywhere I go. I was 32 years old when I agreed to the hiking trip along California's Lost Coast Trail. Photography had always been my escape. Wildlife shots, nature scenes, anything that got me outdoors and away from people. I'd been developing a small but dedicated following online with my work. Wildlife photography was more than a hobby. It was how I processed the world. Through a lens, I could control what I saw, frame the chaos into something beautiful. This trip was supposed to be my comeback. 6 months earlier, my fiancé Marcus had walked out after 3 years together, taking my confidence with him. My friends had watched me withdraw into myself, cancel plans, stop posting my work. The invitation to join them hiking the Lost Coast seemed like the perfect opportunity to reclaim some part of myself. I should have listened to my instincts when they whispered that I wasn't ready. Liam Anderson had organized the whole thing. He was 35, with the kind of charismatic energy that made everyone want to follow him into adventure. We'd been friends since a photography workshop 5 years ago, and he'd remained steadfast even through my recent dark period. His girlfriend Maya Chen was coming too, a 33-year-old emergency room doctor with a meticulous eye for detail and preparation. Then there was Nate Foster, 31, a quiet writer and old college friend who had recently moved back to California. I hadn't seen him in years, but we'd always connected over our introverted natures and creative pursuits. The Lost Coast Trail runs 40 miles through the King Range Conservation Area in Humboldt County, one of the most remote stretches of wilderness in California. It's a narrow strip of land where the mountains rise steeply from the Pacific Ocean, too rugged for Highway 1 to traverse. The isolation is precisely what draws hikers seeking pristine wilderness. It's also what makes it dangerous. "This is going to be exactly what you need, Grace," Liam had insisted during our planning call. 5 days of the most spectacular coastline in America. No cell service, no emails, no social media. Just nature, your camera, and good friends. The first warning sign came 3 days before our departure, when I dreamt of walking alone through dense fog, following footprints in the sand that seemed human at first but gradually elongated into something else. I woke with my heart hammering against my ribs. Just anxiety, I told myself. Just the stress of pushing myself back into the world. We met at a coffee shop in San Francisco before dawn, loading our gear into Liam's SUV. The energy between us was good. Nate and I fell into the easy rhythm of old friendship, and Maya's calm confidence was reassuring. Liam drove north with infectious enthusiasm, regaling us with facts about the trail. It's called the Lost Coast because this section was so rugged they couldn't build the coastal highway through it, he explained. When they were developing Highway 1 in the 1930s, they had to route it inland. This stretch has been preserved as one of the most untouched coastlines in the country. Also, one of the most dangerous, Maya added pragmatically. Several hikers have died there over the years. The tides can trap you against cliffs if you don't time your hiking right, and there are sections where you can get swept away. "That's why we have Maya's meticulous tide charts," Liam said, giving her knee an affectionate squeeze. "No dying on my watch." Nate turned to me in the back seat. "I brought your book with me," he said quietly. I'd published a modest coffee table book of my wildlife photography 2 years earlier, before everything with Marcus fell apart. "You didn't have to do that," I said, embarrassed. "I thought maybe you'd sign it for me," he replied. "Plus, I figured it might inspire you to start shooting seriously again." The drive took nearly 5 hours. We stopped in Garberville for supplies before continuing to the Black Sands Beach trailhead at Shelter Cove, where we would leave Liam's car. A local shuttle service would take us to the northern terminus at Mattole Beach to begin our southbound hike. As we drove the final winding roads through towering redwoods, I felt a strange sensation, like we were being watched. I rolled down my window, breathing in the earthy scent of the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw movement among the trees, something tall and thin, keeping pace with our vehicle. I blinked, and it was gone. "You okay?" Nate asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile, just taking it all in. We reached Shelter Cove by early afternoon. The small coastal settlement seemed eerily quiet as we arranged to leave Liam's car in the designated parking area. Our shuttle driver, an older man named Earl with sun-weathered skin and a gray beard, loaded our packs into his van. "You folks picked a good time to hike," he commented. "Weather should hold, but there's not many people on the trail this week. Most of the seasonal rangers have finished up for the year too. We like having the wilderness to ourselves, Liam replied cheerfully. Earl gave us an odd look. Just make sure you stick to the tide tables, and keep an eye on each other. People have been known to go missing out there. Missing? Maya asked sharply. Earl shrugged. It's rough country. Easy to get hurt if you're not careful. And there's been stories since I was a kid. Local legends about the lost coast. What kind of legends? I found myself asking. Oh, you know, every wilderness has its tales. He seemed suddenly reluctant to elaborate. Probably nothing to them, just the wind and the isolation playing tricks on people's minds. The drive to Mattole Beach took over an hour on rough, winding roads. As we neared our starting point, Earl grew chattier, pointing out landmarks and offering hiking advice. Just before we arrived, he said something that would come back to haunt me. If you see anyone else on the trail acting strange, give them a wide berth. Sometimes people come out here when they're not right in the head, looking to get lost. We unloaded at Mattole Beach in late afternoon. The black sand stretched before us, meeting the churning Pacific Ocean. Behind us rose steep hillsides covered in coastal scrub. We were alone except for the seabirds wheeling overhead and the distant shapes of seals on offshore rocks. We should hike a couple of miles before setting up camp, Liam suggested, consulting his map. There's a good spot just past the lighthouse trail. The first day's hike was uneventful and beautiful. We walked along the beach, the waves crashing beside us, the late September sun casting long shadows across the sand. I took photos of pelicans diving into the surf and the others walking ahead of me, silhouetted against the golden light. For those few hours, I remembered why I loved being outdoors with my camera. We made camp in a small cove sheltered from the wind, pitching our tents on a flat area above the tide line. After dinner, we sat around the campfire sharing stories and passing a flask of whiskey. It felt normal, safe. The stars emerged in brilliant clarity above us, undiminished by city lights. To new beginnings, Liam toasted, raising the flask in my direction. And old friends, Nate added, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Later, as I was drifting off to sleep in my tent, I heard something moving in the darkness outside. Heavy footsteps circling our campsite. I assumed it was one of the others making a late-night bathroom trip. Then I heard what sounded like sniffing, like an animal trying to catch our scent. I sat up, heart racing, but the sound had already faded. The second day was when things began to change. I woke early, slipping out of my tent to photograph the sunrise. The beach was shrouded in mist, creating an ethereal landscape of half-visible rocks and swirling fog. Through my viewfinder, I noticed something strange. What looked like footprints leading from our campsite down to the water's edge. They started human-sized but gradually elongated and deepened, as if the person making them had grown heavier and longer-limbed as they walked. I followed them to where they disappeared into the surf. "What are you looking at?" Maya asked, appearing beside me with a steaming mug of instant coffee. I pointed to the footprints, but when I looked again, they were gone, erased by a wave that hadn't seemed large enough to reach so far up the beach. "Nothing," I said, "just scouting shots." After breakfast, we packed up and continued south. The trail alternated between sandy beaches and rocky headlands, requiring careful timing to pass certain sections at low tide. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures, light breeze, but something felt off. The wildlife seemed unusually scarce. No seals on the rocks, fewer birds overhead. Around midday, our electronics began malfunctioning. Maya's GPS device showed us miles inland, then out in the ocean. Liam's watch stopped at 11:17 a.m. My camera's display glitched, showing strange artifacts in my images that weren't visible through the viewfinder. "Electromagnetic anomaly, maybe?" Maya suggested, tapping her useless GPS. "There could be mineral deposits in these rocks interfering with the signals." "Good thing we have paper maps and compasses," Liam said. But an hour later, when he tried to check our position, the compass needle spun wildly, refusing to settle on north. Nate had been quiet all morning, trailing slightly behind the group. When we stopped for lunch in the shelter of a rocky outcropping, he said, "Did any of you hear anything last night? Like someone walking around the camp?" The others shook their heads, but I felt a chill down my spine. "I thought I heard something," I admitted, "like footsteps and then a sniffing sound. Probably just a raccoon or maybe a deer," Liam suggested. "It sounded bigger," I said. "Could have been a black bear," Maya offered. "They're native to this region, though rare on the coast." Nate was staring at me intently. "It wasn't an animal," he said firmly. After lunch, we hiked inland briefly to avoid a dangerous headland at high tide. The trail took us through a stand of wind-gnarled pines. I noticed Nate stopping frequently to examine the trees. "What are you looking for?" I asked, catching up to him. He pointed to a carving in the trunk of one pine, a crude symbol that looked like a stick figure with too many limbs. "I've seen 3 of these so far." I felt that same uneasiness from earlier. Probably just previous hikers leaving their mark. "Look at how fresh the cuts are," he said. "The sap is still wet." Further along, we found more disturbing signs. A small arrangement of bones, what looked like bird and rodent skeletons, had been carefully placed in the center of the trail. Beyond that, a cluster of small stone towers had been erected, balanced with impossible precision. "Someone's been busy," Liam remarked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "We should move faster," Maya suggested. "I don't like the idea of camping near whoever is making these." By late afternoon, we'd made good progress, covering almost 10 miles. We found a protected campsite in a small meadow set back from the beach, near a freshwater stream. As we set up our tents, I noticed our supplies had somehow been affected despite being in sealed containers. A package of dehydrated beef stew had turned moldy. Fruit had withered as if it had been left for weeks. Even our water, purified just that morning, had a strange metallic taste. "This doesn't make sense," Maya said, examining the spoiled food with her doctor's scrutiny. "This type of mold doesn't grow this quickly, especially not in sealed packages." We salvaged what food remained unspoiled and cooked an abbreviated dinner. The atmosphere had changed from the previous night. We spoke in lower voices, glancing frequently at the darkening woods around us. "I'm going to gather more firewood," Nate announced as the sun began to set. "We should keep the fire going all night." "Don't go far," I said, surprising myself with my concern. He gave me a reassuring smile. "I'll stay within shouting distance." 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Nate hadn't returned. "I'm getting worried," I said to Liam and Maya. "He should have been back by now." "Let's give him a few more minutes," Liam suggested. "He might have just gone a bit farther than planned." But as darkness fell completely, our concern grew into alarm. We called his name, our voices echoing through the trees. No response. "We need to search for him," I insisted, grabbing my flashlight. "We should stick together," Maya said firmly. "It's too dangerous to separate in the dark." We were debating our next move when a figure emerged from the trees. It was Nate, his arms full of firewood. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by irritation. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "We were about to form a search party." "Sorry," he said, dropping the wood by the fire. "I found a great spot with lots of downed branches, but it was a bit farther than I thought." Something in his voice sounded off, a slight flatness that hadn't been there before. As he moved into the firelight, I noticed other subtle differences. His posture was stiffer, his movements more deliberate. When he smiled, it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Never better," he replied, still wearing that not-quite-right smile. "The forest is beautiful at night." During dinner, Nate remained uncharacteristically quiet, watching us with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. When Maya mentioned a camping trip we'd all taken 2 years ago, he looked momentarily confused before nodding vigorously. Right, he said. That was great. But he'd been in Seattle then. He hadn't come with us. I caught his mistake but didn't mention it, a cold suspicion forming in my mind. Later, as Liam and Maya turned in for the night, I stayed by the fire with Nate. I wanted to test my growing unease. "Remember that time in college when we broke into the swimming pool at night?" I asked, watching him carefully. It was something that had never happened. He smiled, that wrong smile again. How could I forget? That was crazy. My blood ran cold. I managed to keep my expression neutral as I made an excuse about being tired and retreated to my tent. Inside, I lay awake, listening to him moving around the campsite. Something was very wrong with Nate, or whatever was pretending to be Nate. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke suddenly in the middle of the night. My watch read 3:17 a.m. I heard whispers just outside my tent, a voice that approximated Nate's but with a strange, rhythmic cadence, speaking words I couldn't understand. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, as the zipper of my tent began to move slowly upward. Through the narrow opening, I saw an eye peering in, an eye that looked like Nate's but was somehow wrong. The pupil seemed to reflect the darkness rather than absorb it. I reached for my flashlight and shined it directly at the opening. The eye disappeared, and I heard retreating footsteps. I didn't sleep again that night. Dawn brought a heavy fog that obscured everything beyond 20 feet. I emerged from my tent to find Liam already up, boiling water for coffee. Or, "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "I don't think Nate is himself." Liam frowned. "What do you mean?" I told him about the false memory, the middle-of-the-night encounter. As I spoke, Maya emerged from her tent, listening with growing concern. "That's disturbing," she acknowledged when I finished. "But there could be explanations. He might have been disoriented after getting lost in the woods. Maybe he has a fever or ate something that disagreed with him." "He tried to come into my tent in the middle of the night," I insisted. "And his eyes, there's something wrong with his eyes." "Where is he now?" Liam asked, looking around. We discovered Nate's tent was empty, his sleeping bag neatly arranged as if it hadn't been used. His backpack remained, but his water bottle and knife were gone. "Maybe he went to the stream," Maya suggested, "or to use the bathroom." We called for him, our voices muffled by the dense fog. No answer. "We should look for him," Liam decided, "but stay together." We searched the area around our campsite, finding nothing until Maya spotted footprints leading toward the stream. We followed them through the misty forest. The footprints started out as normal human tracks but gradually became deeper, longer, with what looked like elongated toe marks. The trail led us to the stream, where the water ran clear over smooth stones. On the opposite bank stood a crude structure about 6 feet tall, a framework of branches lashed together with what looked like sinew, draped with small animal pelts. Hanging from it were dozens of tiny bones and feathers that clicked together in the light breeze. "What the hell is that?" Liam whispered. Before anyone could answer, we heard a scream from somewhere in the fog. Maya's scream. But Maya was standing right beside me, her face drained of color. That's my voice," she said shakily. The scream came again, seeming to move around us, first from one direction, then another. It was indeed Maya's voice calling for help. "We need to go back to camp now," I said urgently. We turned to retrace our steps, but in the fog it was difficult to maintain direction. The footprints we'd followed seemed to have vanished. After 10 minutes of walking, Maya stopped abruptly. "This isn't right," she said. "We should have reached the campsite by now." Liam checked his compass, which was now working again. "According to this, we've been walking southwest, away from camp." "That's impossible," I said. "We've been walking straight back the way we came." We corrected our course and continued. The fog began to thin, revealing unfamiliar terrain, a steep ravine we hadn't crossed before. Somehow, we'd become completely turned around. Time and space don't work right here, Maya said quietly, voicing what we were all thinking. It took us another hour of careful navigation to find our way back to the campsite. When we arrived, Nate was sitting by a freshly built fire, cooking something in a small pot. "Where have you guys been?" he asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "I woke up, and everyone was gone." "We were looking for you," Liam said tensely. "Your tent was empty." "I went down to the beach early to watch the sunrise," Nate explained. "When I got back, you were all gone. I figured you'd started hiking without me." His story made no sense given the footprints we'd followed and the fact that his sleeping bag hadn't been slept in. I studied him carefully. In the daylight, he looked more like himself, but still not quite right. His blinking pattern was off, too infrequent, too deliberate, and he kept staring at Maya with an intensity that made her visibly uncomfortable. "What are you cooking?" Maya asked, peering into the pot. "Just some broth," he replied. "Found some herbs growing nearby. They're good for strength." The liquid in the pot was dark and had a rancid smell. None of us accepted when he offered it to us. We broke camp quickly after that, eager to keep moving. The plan was to hike another 8 miles to the next suitable campsite. The fog had lifted, revealing a clear day, but the sense of wrongness persisted. My camera continued to malfunction, showing distorted images with strange shadows at the edges of the frame. When I reviewed the photos I'd taken the previous day, I noticed something alarming. In several images of our group, Nate's face was blurred while everyone else was in focus. As we hiked, I kept my distance from Nate, staying close to Maya instead. I quietly showed her the photos. "This is really strange," she admitted, swiping through the images on my camera. "But there could be technical explanations." "Like what?" I challenged. She hesitated. "I don't know, but jumping to supernatural conclusions isn't helpful." "Then explain the totems. The bone structures, the footprints that change shape," I pressed. "Explain how we got lost walking in a straight line back to camp." She had no answer for that. Throughout the day, other unsettling things occurred. We passed a dead deer lying just off the trail, its body unnaturally twisted, its eyes and organs missing but with no blood or signs of predation. Our watches showed different times, with as much as 3 hours difference between them. The sun seemed to move irregularly across the sky, sometimes appearing ahead of us, sometimes behind, though we maintained a steady southward course. Nate kept pace with Liam at the front of our group. I noticed him mimicking Liam's gait and gestures, as if studying him. Occasionally, he would turn to look back at Maya and me, that wrong smile flickering across his face. By late afternoon, tension had built to an unbearable level. When we stopped at a scenic overlook to rest, Maya pulled me aside. "I'm starting to think you're right about Nate," she whispered. "Something happened to him in the woods last night." "We need to confront him," I said. "All 3 of us together." She nodded. "After we make camp. Strength in numbers." We found a campsite on a bluff overlooking the ocean, with steep cliffs on one side and dense forest on the other. As we set up our tents, I realized the strategic problem with our location. We'd effectively trapped ourselves with limited escape routes. Nate volunteered to collect water from a small spring nearby. As soon as he was out of earshot, I pulled Liam and Maya together to share our concerns. "I think we need to keep watch tonight," Liam agreed after hearing us out. "Whatever's going on with Nate, I don't want anyone alone with him." "What do you think happened to him?" Maya asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't think that's Nate anymore. Or not just Nate." We grew quiet as we heard him returning. The rest of the evening passed in strained politeness, all of us watching Nate while pretending not to. He ate little, instead watching us consume our meals with that same fixed intensity. When darkness fell, we agreed to sleep in shifts. Liam would take first watch, then me, then Maya. I dozed fitfully during my off-watch hours, jerking awake at every sound. When Liam woke me for my shift, he reported nothing unusual. I sat by the dying fire, feeding it small sticks to maintain enough light to see by. The night was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no rustling of nocturnal animals, not even the sound of waves from the nearby ocean. About an hour into my watch, I heard Maya's voice call my name softly from the direction of the spring. "Grace, can you come here? I found something." But Maya should have been asleep in her tent. I stayed put, heart racing. "Grace, please, I need your help," the voice called again, a perfect imitation of Maya's tone and inflection. I remained by the fire, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. After a few minutes, the voice stopped. Shortly after, I heard movement in the forest, something large crashing through the underbrush, moving away from our camp. When my watch ended, I woke Maya with tremendous relief. I told her about the voice. "That's beyond creepy," she said, visibly shaken. "Do you think it's Nate doing it somehow?" I don't know what to think anymore. I returned to my tent but didn't sleep. Just before dawn, I heard Maya scream, a real scream this time, followed by shouting. I burst from my tent to find chaos. Maya was on the ground near the forest edge, clutching her leg, which was bent at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked through her pants. Liam was kneeling beside her, his face pale with shock. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing to them. "Something dragged her into the woods," Liam said, his voice shaking. "I heard her cry out and found her being pulled away. Whatever had her let go when I got close." "It was Nate," Maya gasped through pain. "He grabbed me when I went to the bathroom. His hands, they weren't human hands anymore." I looked around wildly. "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Liam said. "He disappeared into the trees when I started shouting." Maya's leg was badly broken, the bone nearly protruding through the skin. She was losing blood and going into shock. We needed to get her help immediately, but we were at least 2 days' hike from the nearest road. The emergency beacon, I remembered. Maya had brought a satellite emergency beacon for worst-case scenarios. I dug through her pack and activated it, knowing it could take hours for help to arrive in this remote location. We did our best to stabilize Maya's leg with makeshift splints and moved her into the center of our camp, away from the forest edge. Liam and I positioned ourselves on either side of her, armed with our trekking poles and knives. "We need to stay alert," I said. "Whatever that thing is, it might come back." "You still think it's not Nate?" Liam asked. "I don't think it's ever been Nate," I replied. "Not since he went missing that first night." Hours passed. The sun rose higher, but the expected warmth didn't come with it. Instead, the air grew colder, our breath fogging in front of us despite the clear sky. Maya drifted in and out of consciousness, her face gray with pain and blood loss. The emergency beacon blinked steadily, our only hope of rescue. Around midday, we heard movement at the forest edge. Nate emerged from the trees, looking completely normal except for the dirt covering his clothes and the dried blood on his hands. "Stay back," Liam shouted, raising his trekking pole like a spear. Nate stopped, his expression puzzled. "What's going on? What happened to Maya?" "You know what happened," I said coldly. "You attacked her." He shook his head vehemently. No, I've been lost in the woods all night. I took a wrong turn coming back from the spring yesterday and couldn't find my way back until now." "Stop lying," Maya said weakly from the ground. "I saw you. I felt your hands." Nate's face changed then, the pretense of humanity slipping away. His smile widened, stretching beyond what should have been physically possible. His eyes darkened until they were just pools of shadow. "Such fragile things," he said, his voice no longer entirely his own. It had a layered quality, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. "So easy to break, so easy to become." "What are you?" Liam demanded. The thing wearing Nate's face cocked its head at an unnatural angle. "The local tribes had many names for us. The colonizers called us skinwalkers or wendigos. Names don't matter. We are the hollow ones. We wear your forms, but we're so much more than you could ever be." "Where's the real Nate?" I asked. My voice surprisingly steady despite my terror. It grinned that impossible grin. There is nothing left of your friend. His memories, his voice, his skin. All mine now. But don't worry. Soon, you'll all be part of me, too. It's already begun with her. It nodded toward Maya. Maya moaned, clutching her injured leg. I noticed with horror that the skin around her wound had begun to darken, black veins spreading outward from the injury. The creature took a step forward. Liam lunged with his trekking pole, driving it into the thing's chest. It should have been a debilitating wound, but the entity merely looked down at the pole protruding from its body with mild interest. It pulled the pole out smoothly, dark fluid that wasn't quite blood oozing from the wound. "You can't hurt me with such simple tools," it said almost gently. What happened next unfolded with nightmarish speed. The creature moved with blurring quickness, seizing Liam by the throat and lifting him off the ground. I heard a sickening crack, and Liam went limp. The thing discarded him like trash, turning its attention to Maya and me. I scrambled backward, grabbing for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around the small cooking pot we'd used to boil water. In a desperate move, I flung the contents, still hot from the morning coffee, into the creature's face. It recoiled, hissing in pain, steam rising where the liquid touched its skin. In that moment of distraction, I remembered what Earl, our shuttle driver, had told us about local legends. Many wilderness myths featured creatures vulnerable to fire. I lunged for the campfire, grabbing a burning branch. The creature recovered quickly, advancing toward me again. I thrust the flaming wood at it, and it shrank back, a look of genuine fear crossing its distorted features. "Fire," I said, understanding dawning. "You're afraid of fire." It snarled, no longer bothering to maintain Nate's appearance. Its face seemed to ripple, features becoming elongated and less human, limbs stretched and joints bent in impossible directions. I backed toward Maya, keeping the burning branch between us and the creature. "Can you move at all?" I asked her without taking my eyes off the threat. "I think so," she gasped. "With help." Using one arm to